Why people suddenly lose interest in you and never tell you why. Introduction. The moment they began pulling away. People rarely lose interest all at once. It happens quietly, a slower reply, a shorter conversation, less warmth in their voice, a feeling that something has changed, even though no one has said it. At first, you try not to overthink it. You tell yourself they are busy, tired, distracted, going through something, but deep down, you can feel the distance growing. And the hardest part is not that they're pulling away, it is that you do not know why. The silence gives you no answer. So your mind creates one, and the answer it creates is usually crueler than the truth. Was I too available? Did I say too much? Did I become boring? Did they meet someone better? Did I care more than they did? You replay conversations that once felt natural. You study old messages as though the missing explanation is hidden between the lines. You remember moments that seemed harmless at the time and wonder whether one of them quietly changed everything. But the truth is often more complicated than one mistake. People do not always lose interest because you did something wrong. Sometimes they lose interest because the way they see you has changed, and that change can happen long before they understand it themselves. Attraction, respect, curiosity, emotional connection. These things are rarely controlled by logic alone. They are shaped by invisible signals. How you carry yourself, how quickly you abandon your own needs, how much of your life remains your own, what you tolerate, what you reveal too soon, what you keep trying to prove. And sometimes, the more desperately you try to keep someone interested, the more something inside them quietly begins to move away. Not because caring is unattractive, not because kindness is weakness, but because fear changes the energy behind everything you do. A message sent from genuine affection feels different from a message sent to prevent someone from leaving. A kind gesture feels different when it comes from confidence than when it comes from anxiety. Silence feels different when it comes from peace than when it comes from punishment. People may not consciously understand these differences, but they almost always feel them. That is why someone can say all the right things and still create distance. Why someone can give more, explain more, try harder, and somehow feel less valued. Why the person who cares the most often becomes the one who feels easiest to ignore. It seems unfair, and sometimes it is. But beneath the unfairness is a pattern most people never learn to recognize. When you sense someone pulling away, your first instinct is usually to move closer. You ask more questions. You become more available. You offer more reassurance. You try to remind them of the connection you once had. But attention given from fear rarely creates closeness. It often creates pressure. And pressure quietly changes the emotional balance of a relationship. Now one person is choosing, the other is waiting to be chosen. One person is deciding how much they want, the other is trying to become enough. That imbalance can slowly destroy what both people once enjoyed. The painful part is that no one explains this while it's happening. The person losing interest may not even have the language to describe it. They simply say they are confused, busy, not ready, unsure about what they want. Sometimes those reasons are honest. Sometimes they are softer versions of a truth they do not know how to say. They no longer feel the same pull. And rather than explain what changed, they slowly disappear. This leaves you carrying all the questions. But there is one question more important than all the others. Not, how do I make them want me again? But, what changed inside me when I felt them pulling away? Did you become more anxious? Did you start performing instead of connecting? Did you stop expressing what you truly wanted? Did you lower your standards because losing them felt worse than losing yourself? Did you begin measuring your value through their attention? That is where the real story begins. Because sometimes the fear of losing someone causes you to become a version of yourself they were never drawn to in the first place. You become cautious instead of natural, agreeable instead of honest, available instead of fulfilled. You start watching every word. You stop bringing your full personality into the room. And without realizing it, you replace the connection with a performance. But no performance can create lasting intimacy. It can only delay the moment when both people realize something real has gone missing. This audiobook is not about manipulating people into staying. It is not about acting cold, disappearing on purpose, or pretending not to care. Those games may create temporary curiosity. They do not create genuine respect. What you are about to learn is deeper. You will discover why familiarity can reduce desire, why overgiving sometimes lowers your value, why emotional dependence creates invisible pressure, why some people lose interest the moment they feel they have completely secured your attention, why mystery matters, but not in the way most people think, and why the strongest relationships are built between two people who genuinely want each other, but never abandon themselves just to keep each other. You will also learn something that may be difficult to hear. Sometimes people do not lose interest because you became less valuable. They lose interest because they were never capable of recognizing your value for long. Some people are only attracted to uncertainty. Some are emotionally unavailable. Some enjoy pursuit more than connection. Some want attention, not intimacy. And some only realize what you meant to them after your absence forces them to feel it. Understanding this can save you years of self-blame, but it can also reveal the habits that are yours to change. Because there is a difference between being rejected and repeatedly creating relationships where rejection becomes likely. There is a difference between loving deeply and losing yourself. There is a difference between being vulnerable and becoming emotionally dependent on someone else's response. Once you understand those differences, you stop chasing explanations from people who refuse to give them. You stop begging for clarity from someone whose behavior has already answered you. You stop asking how to become more desirable to the wrong person, and you begin asking a far more powerful question. Who do I become when I no longer need to convince anyone to choose me? That question changes the way you speak, the way you walk away, the way you handle silence, the way you recognize genuine interest, and the way you protect your dignity without closing your heart. By the end of this audiobook, you will understand why people suddenly lose interest, what hidden behaviors quietly accelerate emotional distance, and how to become someone whose presence is valued, not because you manipulate attention, but because you no longer offer your entire identity in exchange for it. You may finally understand why that person became distant, but more importantly, you may understand why their distance hurt you so deeply. And once you understand that, something shifts. You stop trying to recover the version of you they once wanted. You begin rebuilding the version of you that never needed to be chased, tested, or abandoned to know its worth. The first step is seeing the moment interest begins to fade. It rarely begins when they stop replying. It begins much earlier, usually in a small emotional shift almost everyone overlooks. That is where our story begins. Here's Chapter 1 following your master prompt. To keep the response within a single message, I've written the opening portion in the intended style. We can continue the chapter seamlessly in subsequent parts while maintaining the same tone, pacing, and narrative flow. Chapter 1. The silent distance nobody notices. It almost never begins with an argument. If it did, life would be easier. Arguments have shape. They have words. They leave evidence behind. Silence does not. One day, someone laughs at your jokes. The next, they smile a little less. You tell yourself it means nothing. People have bad days. Work becomes stressful. Life gets busy. You don't want to become the kind of person who overthinks every little change. So you ignore the feeling. But your mind doesn't. Long before you consciously recognize that something is changing, another part of you has already noticed. Not because it can predict the future, but because it has spent your entire life studying tiny patterns you never realized you were learning. A pause that lasts a second longer. A hug that feels slightly different. A message that once arrived in minutes now arrives hours later. A voice that sounds warm, yet somehow feels distant. None of these moments prove anything on their own, yet together they create a feeling that is almost impossible to explain. You don't have evidence. You only have instinct. And instinct is a strange thing. Most people either trust it too much or ignore it completely. Very few people know how to listen without becoming consumed by it. That is why emotional distance is so confusing. It arrives before certainty. It whispers before it speaks. And because it whispers, Most people spend weeks trying to convince themselves they imagined it. You continue acting normally. You send the same messages. You make the same jokes. You ask the same questions. Yet something invisible has already shifted, not necessarily in them. Sometimes it begins inside you. There is an uncomfortable truth that very few people are willing to accept. The moment you begin fearing that someone might leave, you often stop behaving like the person they first enjoyed being around. Nothing dramatic changes. You simply become more careful. You read every message twice before sending it. You hesitate before expressing disagreement. You start wondering how your words will be received instead of simply speaking them. Without realizing it, you begin replacing authenticity with strategy. At first, it feels responsible. You believe you're protecting the relationship, but relationships breathe through honesty, not performance. Think about the last time you truly felt relaxed around someone. You weren't calculating every sentence. You weren't wondering if replying too quickly would make you seem desperate. You weren't counting who initiated the conversation last. You weren't trying to become interesting. You were simply present. That presence is often what people remember, not your stories, not your achievements, not even your appearance. Presence creates a feeling that cannot be copied. And yet, the moment fear enters a room, presence quietly walks out. Fear is subtle. It rarely announces itself. Instead, it disguises itself as effort. You think you're showing more love, but you're actually seeking more certainty. You think you're becoming more thoughtful, but you're actually becoming more anxious. The difference is almost invisible from the outside, but emotionally, it changes everything. Imagine standing at the edge of a lake. When the water is still, you can clearly see your reflection. Throw one small stone, and the entire surface begins to ripple. The reflection hasn't disappeared. It has simply become distorted. Relationships often work the same way. One small fear, one quiet insecurity, one unanswered question can create emotional ripples that make two people struggle to see each other clearly. The mistake most people make is believing the ripple is the problem. It isn't. The stone is. Yet we spend enormous amounts of energy chasing symptoms instead of understanding what disturbed the water in the first place. That is why so many conversations fail. One person says, "Is everything okay?" The other replies, "Yes." Technically, neither of them is lying, because the distance neither person understands cannot yet be described with words. It exists as a feeling before it becomes conversation. This is why people often look back after a relationship ends and say, "I don't know when we started growing apart." The truth is, they usually do know. They simply ignored dozens of tiny moments because none of them seemed important on their own. Life is built from ordinary moments. So are relationships. Nobody wakes up one morning completely disconnected from someone they deeply loved the day before. Distance accumulates quietly, just as trust does, just as respect does, just as intimacy does. Everything meaningful grows or fades, one ordinary day at a time. Perhaps you've experienced this in friendships. A person who once called every weekend now only sends the occasional emoji. No argument happened. No betrayal. Just less conversation, less curiosity, less effort, less laughter. The human mind struggles with less. It would almost prefer a clear ending. Certainty hurts, but uncertainty exhausts. When something ends without explanation, your imagination begins writing explanations of its own. And imagination has no obligation to be kind. It often tells you exactly what you fear most. Maybe you're boring. Maybe you're not enough. Maybe people always leave. Maybe everyone eventually gets tired. Chapter 2. Why Familiarity Kills Attraction. Most people believe love disappears because something went wrong. But often, nothing obvious happened at all. No betrayal. No dramatic fight. No single sentence that changed everything. Instead, the extraordinary slowly became ordinary. The person who once made your heart race became someone you expected to see. The voice that once made you smile became another sound in your day. The message that once filled you with excitement became another notification to answer later. Nothing became worse. It simply became familiar. And familiarity is strange. It makes wonderful things almost invisible. Think about the room you're sitting in right now. You probably haven't noticed the color of the walls for several minutes. You haven't admired the shape of the door. You haven't appreciated the quiet hum of the room around you. Not because those things disappeared, but because your mind stopped paying attention to what it already understood. Your brain is constantly deciding what deserves your awareness. If it treated every moment as brand new, you will become exhausted before lunchtime. So it creates shortcuts. It quietly whispers, I already know this. And the moment it believes it already knows something, it stops looking closely. This helps you survive, but it can quietly damage your relationships. One day you realize you've stopped asking your partner questions, not because you no longer care, but because you assume you already know the answers. You stop wondering what made them smile today. You stop noticing the little expressions that once fascinated you. You stop becoming curious. Without realizing it, certainty quietly replaces discovery. And discovery is one of the deepest forms of emotional attraction. When people first meet, everything feels alive. A single conversation can last until 2 a.m, not because either person is saying extraordinary things, but because every sentence reveals another hidden piece of someone they have never known before. Curiosity creates energy. Questions create movement. The unknown creates possibility. That is why beginnings often feel magical. It is not only the other person you are falling in love with, it is the experience of discovering them. Then something subtle begins to happen. Days become weeks. Weeks become months. Conversations slowly become updates instead of discoveries. How was work? Fine. What do you want for dinner? I don't mind. Did you sleep well? Not really. Nothing is wrong with these conversations. They simply stop opening new doors. Life becomes efficient, but less surprising. And human beings rarely crave efficiency in their closest relationships. They crave aliveness. Here is something few people notice. Familiarity itself is not the problem. The problem is what familiarity often convinces us to stop doing. We stop paying attention. We stop listening with fresh ears. We stop observing with fresh eyes. We stop asking questions we think we already know the answers to. Imagine reading your favorite book for the 10th time. You already know how every chapter ends. You already know every twist. Your eyes move across the words, but your mind no longer experiences the same excitement. Now imagine someone hands that exact same book to a person who has never opened it before. Every page feels alive. Every sentence creates anticipation. The book did not change. The relationship between the reader and the book changed. Something similar happens between people. The greatest danger is not becoming familiar. It is believing familiarity means there is nothing left to discover, because no human being is ever finished. Every person changes. Quietly, constantly. The version of someone you knew last year no longer exists. Neither does a version of you. People carry invisible experiences every day. A conversation at work, a disappointment they never mentioned, a dream they quietly abandoned, a fear they never spoke aloud, a memory that returned while driving home. These small moments slowly reshape who we become. Yet the language sounds different. Every building feels worth noticing. Every meal becomes an experience. Nothing around them has become objectively better. It is simply new. Their attention has awakened. Now, Imagine bringing that same quality of attention into an ordinary relationship. Imagine looking at someone you have known for years, not through memory, but through curiosity. Imagine asking questions without assuming the answers. Imagine noticing their laughter again, the way they pause before speaking, the things that have quietly changed since last month. Suddenly, the familiar begins feeling alive again. Chapter 3. Neediness begins in the subconscious. Very few people wake up one morning and decide to become needy. It happens so gradually that you hardly notice it. One day, you send someone a message because you genuinely want to share something that made you smile. A few months later, you send a message because you're hoping they'll prove they still care. The action looks the same, but the reason behind it has completely changed. That hidden shift is where everything begins. Most people believe neediness is about asking for too much attention. It isn't. Attention is only the symptom. Neediness begins much deeper, long before you ask for reassurance, long before you double text, long before you start wondering why they become distant. It begins the moment your sense of peace quietly becomes connected to another person's behavior. Think about how often your mood has changed because of a single notification. Your phone vibrates. Your heart lifts. It isn't them. A small disappointment settles inside you. Nothing in your own life has actually changed. The weather is the same. Your work is the same. Your friends are the same. Your dreams are still waiting for you. Yet one unanswered message suddenly feels capable of changing your entire day. That is a remarkable kind of power to hand another human being. And most people do it without ever realizing they have. When you were younger, you probably looked toward the door every time you heard someone arrive home. You learned to recognize footsteps before faces. The sound of a key turning in the lock, the way someone closed a door, the tone they used when saying your name. Tiny details quietly told you whether the evening would feel safe or tense. Children become experts at reading emotional weather, not because they choose to, because they have to. Long before you understand words like confidence or self-worth, you are already learning something much more powerful. You are learning whether love feels predictable or uncertain, whether attention arrives freely or must be earned, whether affection appears consistently or only after pleasing someone else. No child sits down and writes these lessons. Life writes them silently. Years later, those same lessons often reappear in relationships. Someone doesn't reply for a few hours, and suddenly an old feeling returns, not because a delayed reply is dangerous, but because your heart remembers uncertainty far better than your mind does. That is one of the strangest things about being human. The past rarely returns looking like the past. It returns wearing today's clothes. You think you're reacting to a text message, when part of you is responding to experiences that happened years ago. That realization changes everything, because it means your strongest emotional reactions are not always about the present moment. Sometimes they are echoes. Imagine shouting into a valley. Your voice disappears, then comes back a few seconds later. If you didn't know about echoes, you might think someone else was speaking. Emotions can work the same way. A feeling arrives. It seems completely connected to what just happened, but sometimes the intensity belongs to something much older. This explains why two people can experience the exact same situation and respond in completely different ways. One person smiles and continues their day after waiting 6 hours for a reply. Another spends those same 6 hours checking their phone every few minutes, inventing explanations, feeling rejected before a single word has been exchanged. The event is identical. At first, you enjoy someone's company. Eventually, you begin depending on it. Those two experiences feel almost identical, but they create completely different lives. Enjoyment says, "My life is already meaningful, and your presence adds something beautiful to it." Dependence quietly whispers, "My peace now depends on whether you choose me today." One creates freedom, the other creates fear. The tragedy is that dependence often disguises itself as love. People proudly say, "I can't live without you. I need you. You're my everything." Those words sound romantic, until you imagine carrying the responsibility of being someone else's entire emotional world. That weight is heavier than most people can sustain. Healthy love allows someone to breathe. Dependence quietly asks them to become oxygen. No relationship can flourish under that kind of pressure forever. Perhaps this is why people often describe certain relationships as exhausting without fully understanding why. Nothing dramatic is happening. No one is shouting. No one is fighting. Yet every interaction carries an invisible expectation. One person is constantly checking whether the other still cares. The other begins feeling responsible for emotions they cannot permanently manage without intending to. Affection slowly turns into obligation, and obligation rarely feels like love. Have you ever noticed how children sometimes chase butterflies? The faster they run, the faster the butterfly flies away. Eventually, they stop, they become still. Sometimes, the butterfly returns on its own. Relationships are obviously more complex than butterflies, but there is something deeply true hidden inside that image. Life often moves toward what feels peaceful and away from what feels like pressure. Neediness is not unattractive because it asks for connection. It becomes difficult because fear quietly replaces freedom. People no longer feel invited into your life. They begin feeling responsible for holding it together. That was never your intention. Most people who become emotionally dependent are among the most loving people you'll ever meet. They care deeply. They notice everything. They give generously. They remain loyal long after others would have left. Their greatest strength quietly becomes their greatest vulnerability because somewhere along the way, their love stopped flowing from abundance and began flowing from fear. The fear of losing, the fear of not being enough, the fear that if they stopped giving so much, no one would stay. But love offered as proof of your worth eventually becomes exhausting for both people. Not because love is exhausting, but because proving yourself never ends. The remarkable thing is that none of this usually begins in adulthood. By the time you notice yourself overthinking a relationship, the roots may already be decades old. Not because your past controls your future, but because unnoticed patterns quietly influence present choices. And patterns only lose their power the moment they become visible. Perhaps that is why awareness feels so unsettling at first. You begin realizing what looked like someone else's behavior was sometimes a conversation between your present life and your oldest emotional memories. Once you see that, you can never quite see relationships the same way again. There's another reason neediness is so difficult to recognize. It rarely feels like fear. It feels like love. You tell yourself, I'm only checking because I care. I'm only asking because communication matters. I'm only worried because this relationship is important to me. And sometimes that is completely true. But there comes a moment when caring quietly crosses an invisible line. You stop wanting connection and begin needing reassurance. Those two desires may sound almost identical, yet they lead to completely different lives. Connection says, I enjoy being close to you. Reassurance quietly whispers, "Please convince me that I am still safe." One is an invitation. The other is a request to silence and interfere. That fear is rarely caused by the person standing in front of you. They simply become the latest person carrying it. Have you ever noticed how quickly your mind can create a story? Someone says they are busy, and suddenly your imagination begins working overtime. Maybe they're losing interest. Maybe I said something wrong. Maybe they realize I'm not enough. Within minutes, a single unanswered message has become an entire future that hasn't happened. The remarkable part is not how quickly the story appears. It is how believable it feels. Your heart begins reacting to events that exist only inside your imagination. Your breathing changes. Your mood changes. Your confidence changes. Not because reality changed, but because your interpretation did. That is one of the quietest powers your mind possesses. It does not wait for certainty. It fills empty spaces with meaning. Sometimes that ability protects you. It helps you notice danger before danger fully arrives. But in relationships, it often creates suffering long before suffering is real. Imagine reading a book where every few pages are missing. Your mind would naturally begin guessing what happened between them. Relationships are filled with missing pages. You never fully know what another person is thinking. You do not hear every conversation they have. You cannot see every emotion they experience. Your mind fills those empty spaces, whether you ask it to or not. The question is, what kind of story does it usually write? Some people naturally write hopeful stories. They're probably busy. We'll talk later. Everything is probably fine. Others instinctively write fearful ones. They're pulling away. They're tired of me. This is how it always begins. Neither person has more information, only different expectations. Expectations are quiet architects. They shape the emotional world long before reality arrives. This explains why two people can receive the exact same text. "Sorry, today has been crazy." One smiles. The other spends the evening wondering whether the relationship is ending. Words matter, but expectations often matter more. Here is something worth noticing. Neediness rarely begins with another person. It begins with the relationship you have with uncertainty. Some people can sit comfortably inside unanswered questions. Others feel compelled to solve them immediately. That difference quietly shapes almost every relationship they enter. Life refuses to explain everything. Some conversations end without closure. Some people leave without offering reasons. Some friendships slowly disappear without ever announcing their ending. Learning to live with uncertainty may be one of the greatest emotional skills anyone can develop, because certainty is surprisingly addictive. Once you begin needing constant reassurance, no amount of reassurance ever feels permanent. Someone tells you they love you. It feels wonderful. For a while, then your mind quietly asks, do they still mean it today? They reassure you again. Peace returns. Until the next moment of silence, the cycle begins again. Eventually, you are no longer asking for love. You are asking for relief. Relief never lasts, because relief treats symptoms, not causes. Imagine trying to fill a bucket that has a tiny hole in the bottom. You pour more water. It looks full. Then slowly, the level begins falling again. You pour more and more. Soon you begin believing you simply need more water. The real problem was never the amount. It was the hole. External reassurance works much the same way. It feels wonderful, but if your sense of worth quietly leaks away every time someone becomes distant, no amount of reassurance will ever feel like enough. This is why people sometimes become exhausted trying to love someone who secretly doubts their own value. No matter how often they say, "I care about you. You're important to me. I'm not leaving." The words keep disappearing into the same invisible hole, not because they are insincere, but because fear quietly consumes them. There is another pattern almost nobody notices. The more frightened you become of losing someone, the less yourself you become. You begin editing your personality. You stop disagreeing. You become unusually agreeable. You laugh at things that are not funny. You apologize for feelings that never need an apology. You slowly become easier to accept while becoming harder to recognize. Perhaps you experience this without realizing it. You leave a conversation and think, why didn't I say what I really meant? Why did I pretend I was okay? Why did I agree to something I didn't want? Those moments are rarely about weakness. They're often quiet negotiations with fear. Fear asks a dangerous question. Who do I need to become so they won't leave? The problem is, that question never has a satisfying answer, because every successful performance creates another performance tomorrow. You become trapped inside a version of yourself that was built to avoid rejection. The saddest part is that if someone falls in love with a performance, you still wonder whether they would have loved the real you. There's very little peace inside pretending. Freedom begins the moment you no longer believe that love must be earned by becoming smaller. Think about the people whose company feels peaceful. You probably don't remember them because they were perfect. You remember them because you never felt you had to audition for their acceptance. You could make mistakes. You could disagree. You could be quiet. You could simply exist. Real connection creates room for honesty. Fear creates room only for performance. That realization changes the way you see relationships. The goal is not to become someone nobody could ever leave. Such a person has never existed. The goal is to become someone who does not abandon themselves trying to prevent others from leaving. Those are completely different lives. One is built around control. The other is built around self-respect. One chases certainty. The other chooses authenticity. And perhaps that is the hidden beginning of emotional freedom. Not finding someone who never makes you anxious, but becoming someone whose peace is no longer decided by another person's uncertainty. Because when your worth no longer rises and falls with every message, every delay, every change in tone, something remarkable begins to happen. You stop listening only to your fears. You begin listening to reality. And reality has been trying to tell you the truth all along. You simply could not hear it over the noise of your own uncertainty. There is one question that quietly changes everything. Not, why am I so afraid of losing people? But, what part of me believes I disappear when someone else walks away? Those questions may sound similar. They are not. The first keeps your attention on other people. The second gently brings it back to yourself. That is where healing quietly begins. For a moment, think about your happiest memories, not the ones involving achievement, or money, or recognition. The moments that made you feel deeply alive. Perhaps it was laughing until your stomach hurt with a friend, walking through a quiet park without looking at your phone, watching the sky change color as the sun disappeared, cooking with someone you loved, listening to music while driving with the windows open. Notice something? Very few of those memories happened because someone was constantly reassuring you. They happened because in those moments, you were fully present. Presence is surprisingly difficult to experience when your mind is constantly checking whether you are still wanted. Fear steals attention. And whatever steals your attention quietly steals your life. This is why emotional dependence hurts so much. It doesn't only change your relationships. It changes your relationship with ordinary moments. Instead of enjoying dinner, you wonder why they haven't replied. Instead of hearing the birds outside, you keep checking your notifications. Instead of laughing with friends, part of your mind remains somewhere else, waiting, hoping, interpreting. The body may be present, but the mind is already left. That is a high price to pay for certainty. One of the greatest misunderstandings about love is the belief that closeness requires constant proof. In reality, the healthiest relationships often contain remarkable amounts of freedom, not emotional distance. Freedom to spend an afternoon apart without inventing stories. Freedom to disagree without fearing abandonment. Freedom to say, I need some time alone, without the other person hearing, I don't love you anymore. Freedom allows affection to breathe. Control quietly suffocates it. Imagine holding a handful of sand. Hold it gently, and most of it remains in your hand. Clench your fist tightly, and the sand slips through your fingers. Many people unknowingly love with a closed fist, not because they want to control someone, but because they fear what will happen if they loosen their grip. Yet love has always responded better to open hands than closed ones. There's another hidden cost of neediness that rarely gets discussed. It quietly shrinks your world. The hobbies you once loved become less important. The books remain unread. The gym membership goes unused. The dreams that once excited you slowly become postponed. Without noticing, one person begins occupying space that once belonged to your own life. Then something painful happens. If they leave, it feels as though they took your identity with them. But they didn't. You slowly handed pieces of it away over time. The beautiful truth is that the opposite is also possible. You can slowly reclaim it. Not all at once. Quietly. One afternoon at a time. One forgotten hobby. One evening with friends. One walk without your phone. One decision made because it reflects who you are, not because it might make someone choose you. These moments seem small. Yet identity is built from small moments repeated often. You do not become emotionally independent because you read one insightful book. You become emotionally independent by repeatedly proving to yourself that your life continues to have meaning, even when another person's attention moves elsewhere. That lesson cannot be borrowed. It must be lived. There's a quiet confidence that begins growing inside people who stop chasing approval. It is not loud. It does not announce itself. It rarely seeks attention. You notice it in simple ways. They do not rush to fill every silence. They do not panic when plans change. They do not explain themselves to everyone. They listen more carefully. They speak more honestly. They leave situations that no longer respect them without needing the other person to agree with their decision. This kind of confidence does not come from believing everyone will stay. It comes from knowing you will not abandon yourself if they don't. That realization changes relationships in ways most people never expect. Ironically, the less desperately you need someone to stay, the easier it becomes to love them freely, because your kindness is no longer negotiating. Your generosity is no longer performing. Your affection is no longer asking for permission to exist. It simply becomes an honest expression of who you are. People often describe this as becoming more attractive. Perhaps, but that word doesn't quite capture it. What others feel is not perfection. It is emotional safety. There is something deeply calming about being with a person who is not trying to pull certainty out of every conversation. Someone who is able to enjoy the moment without constantly asking where everything is going. That calmness is rare, and rare things are naturally valued. Maybe that is why some of the most peaceful people seem strangely magnetic. Not because they are trying to attract anyone, but because they have stopped chasing. The paradox is almost beautiful. The moment you stop making another person responsible for your happiness, you become far easier to love. Not because you change your appearance, not because you learn clever techniques, but because your presence no longer carries the weight of hidden expectations. People feel lighter around you, and you feel lighter around yourself. If there is one idea worth carrying with you after today, let it be this. Neediness is not proof that you are broken. It is often proof that some part you learned long ago that love could disappear without warning. That part deserves understanding, not shame. But understanding alone is not enough. Once you recognize the pattern, you also inherit the responsibility to gently change it, not by becoming colder, not by pretending not to care, not by playing games, but by building a life so full of purpose, curiosity, friendship, peace, and self-respect. That love becomes something you share, not something you desperately search for. One day, you may notice your phone lying quietly beside you for hours, not because nobody cares, but because your happiness is no longer waiting for it to light up. One day, someone may take longer to reply, and instead of inventing 10 painful stories, you simply continue living your life. One day, you may discover that your greatest source of peace was never another person's constant attention. It was your own quiet decision to stop measuring your worth by it. That decision changes more than relationships. It changes the way you walk into every room, the way you handle uncertainty, the way you experience silence, and the way you love. Because the deepest form of love has never been about holding on tightly. It has always been about remaining fully yourself, even while holding someone close. Perhaps that is where real closeness begins, not with two people trying to complete each other, But with two whole people choosing, every day, to walk beside each other without losing themselves along the way, and once you begin to understand that, you start noticing something even quieter. Sometimes people do not drift away because they stopped loving. They drift away because they slowly stop feeling emotionally safe. That kind of distance is almost invisible at first, yet it changes everything. And learning to recognize it may be one of the most valuable skills you ever develop. Chapter 4. Why People Respect Emotional Independence. There is something people notice before you say a single word. They notice how much you need them. Not consciously, not as a calculation. It happens quietly, almost instinctively. You walk into a room. Someone smiles. Someone else barely looks up. Within seconds, your mind begins measuring the room. Who noticed me? Who didn't? Should I speak first? Do they seem interested? Most people believe confidence is about having the right words. It isn't. Long before words matter, people sense where your emotional center lives. Some people carry it within themselves. Others unknowingly carry it in the hands of everyone around them. The difference changes every conversation. Imagine two people waiting outside for a job interview. Both are equally qualified. Both are equally nervous. One thinks, I hope they choose me. The other thinks, I hope this opportunity is a good fit for both of us. The situation is identical, yet the emotional posture is completely different. One person has already placed their value inside someone else's decision. The other has not. That difference is almost invisible, but it quietly shapes body language, tone of voice, eye contact, even silence. People often describe this as confidence. What they are actually sensing is emotional independence. It is one of the rarest qualities a person can develop, not because it is difficult to understand, but because it asks you to stop searching for yourself inside other people's opinions. That is much harder than it sounds. From the time we are children, approval feels like survival. A teacher smiles after we answer correctly. Our parents praise us when we behave well. Friends invite us to join their games. Bit by bit, our minds begin linking acceptance with safety. There is nothing wrong with that. Human beings were never meant to live completely alone. We naturally care what others think. The trouble begins when caring quietly becomes appending. That shift is so gradual that most people never notice it. You post a photograph online. At first, you simply enjoy sharing a memory. Then you begin checking how many people liked it. A few minutes later, you check again. Hours pass. You wonder why someone important hasn't responded. The photograph hasn't changed, but your relationship with it has. Its value is no longer found in the memory. It is found in the reaction. This happens everywhere. Someone compliments your work. You feel energized. Another person criticizes it, and suddenly you begin questioning everything. One sentence outweighs 20 kind ones. Not because criticism is more truthful, but because uncertainty always speaks louder than certainty. The human mind has an old habit. It pays extra attention to anything that might threaten belonging. Thousands of years ago, being separated from your group could mean real danger. Today, a delayed reply or an awkward conversation is not life-threatening, yet your body sometimes responds as though it is. That is why emotional independence feels so unfamiliar at first. It asks you to remain steady, even when approval becomes uncertain. Have you ever noticed someone who seems strangely calm in almost every situation? Not cold, not distant, simply calm. Someone disagrees with them. They listen. Plans suddenly change. They adjust. A joke doesn't land. They smile and continue talking. They do not spend the next 3 days replaying every sentence in their head. People often assume these individuals were simply born confident. Usually, that isn't true. They have simply stopped making every interaction a referendum on their worth. That changes everything. Imagine walking through a supermarket. You place fruit into your basket. You choose bread. You compare prices. Someone walks past without smiling. Do you spend the rest of the day wondering why? Probably not. Now imagine that same lack of attention coming from someone whose opinion has quietly become tied to your self-worth. Suddenly, everything feels different. Nothing about the event changed, only its emotional meaning. Meaning is one of the most powerful forces in human life. The events themselves rarely shape us as much as the stories we quietly attach to them. One unanswered message becomes, "I'm not important." One canceled dinner becomes, "They're losing interest." One disagreement becomes, "Maybe I'm too much." Little by little, life becomes heavier than it needs to be. Not because reality became harsher, but because every ordinary moment is carrying extraordinary emotional weight. There is another reason people respect emotional independence. It creates space. Think about your favorite conversations. They probably didn't feel rushed. Nobody was desperately trying to impress anyone. Nobody was demanding constant reassurance. There was room to think, room to laugh, room for silence. Silence is interesting. Many people become uncomfortable the moment it appears. They rush to fill it. They explain too much, apologize too quickly, speak before thinking. Why? Because silence feels uncertain, and uncertainty often awakens old fears. Someone who is emotionally independent experiences silence differently. Silence is simply silence. It does not automatically become rejection. That alone changes how they communicate. They ask better questions. They interrupt less. They notice more. Perhaps this is why some people feel deeply comforting to be around. You never feel pressured to become someone else. You don't feel judged for pausing before you answer. You don't feel responsible for managing their emotions. You simply feel accepted. Ironically, the people who make others feel safest are often those who need the least from them, not because they care less, but because they are no longer asking every interaction to repair something inside themselves. That freedom is quietly magnetic. It allows kindness without control, affection without pressure, love without possession. Most people spend years trying to become more interesting. They read more books, improve their appearance, practice clever conversation. Those things can certainly help, but one quiet habit often has a greater effect than all of them combined. Learning to leave your sense of worth at home, instead of carrying it into every conversation. Because once your worth is no longer waiting for another person's approval, you begin showing up as you truly are. And people rarely forget someone who makes authenticity feel safe. There is a quiet moment that reveals more about a person than almost anything they say. It happens when they don't get what they want. Perhaps they send a thoughtful message. Hours pass. Nothing. Or they make a suggestion in a meeting. The conversation moves on without acknowledging it. Or they invite someone to spend time together, only to hear, maybe another day. These moments seem ordinary. Most people forget them within minutes. Yet they quietly expose where someone's emotional balance truly lives. Some people experience disappointment, then continue with their day. Others carry it everywhere they go, not because they are weak, but because disappointment begins asking questions that were never really about the event itself. Why wasn't I enough? Did I do something wrong? Why does this always happen to me? Notice how quickly one unanswered invitation becomes a judgment about an entire identity. That leap happens so naturally that it almost feels invisible. The mind dislikes loose ends. When something doesn't make sense, it rushes to create an explanation. Unfortunately, the first explanation is often the harshest one. Imagine walking past someone you know. You smile. They keep walking. For the rest of the afternoon, your mind quietly searches for answers. Maybe they're upset. Maybe I offended them. Maybe they're avoiding me. Then, the next day, you discover they were wearing headphones. or they had just received difficult news, or they simply never saw you. Reality was innocent. The suffering came from the story created in its absence. This happens far more often than people realize. Most emotional pain is not created by certainty. It grows inside uncertainty. And uncertainty has a habit of borrowing the voice of our oldest fears. That is one reason emotionally independent people appear so calm. It isn't that life gives them fewer disappointments. Life is equally unpredictable for everyone. Their difference lies somewhere else. They have learned to delay judgment. Instead of immediately asking, "What does this say about me?" they quietly wonder, "What else could be true?" That single question creates extraordinary peace. It leaves room for reality to arrive before imagination takes over. Very few people practice this, perhaps because certainty feels comforting even when the certainty is painful. An uncomfortable answer often feels easier than an unanswered question. Yet emotional maturity sometimes means allowing questions to remain unanswered for a while. That takes patience. And patience has become surprisingly rare. Everything around us encourages immediacy, instant messages, instant delivery, instant entertainment. We have quietly trained ourselves to expect immediate emotional clarity as well. When clarity doesn't arrive, anxiety fills the space. Have you ever refreshed your messages, knowing perfectly well nothing new could have appeared in the last 5 seconds? Most people have. The action isn't really about information. It's about relief. For one brief moment, you hope uncertainty will disappear. Sometimes it does. Most of the time, it returns almost immediately. Relief is temporary. Inner stability is different. Inner stability allows uncertainty to exist without immediately trying to eliminate it. That changes relationships in remarkable ways. Think about someone whose company always feels peaceful. You probably never felt pressured to respond instantly. You never felt guilty for needing time alone. You never worried that one awkward conversation would end everything. Their calmness quietly gave you permission to relax. Now think about the opposite. Someone who needs constant confirmation. Someone who reads hidden meanings into ordinary moments. Someone who asks, "Are you angry?" even when nothing has happened. Eventually, conversations stop feeling natural. You begin managing emotions instead of sharing experiences. That shift is exhausting. People rarely pull away because someone cared too much. They often pull away because every interaction begins carrying emotional responsibility they never agreed to hold. No relationship thrives when one person becomes responsible for keeping another person's inner world stable. That responsibility eventually becomes too heavy. This is something many people misunderstand. They believe emotional independence means never needing anyone. It doesn't. Every human being needs connection. Every human being wants to feel understood. The difference is subtle. Connection enriches your life. Dependence quietly replaces it. Imagine 2 trees growing side by side. Their branches may eventually intertwine. They may provide shade for one another. They may even protect each other from strong winds. Yet each tree still grows from its own roots. Now imagine if one tree had no roots at all. It could survive only by leaning entirely against the other. Eventually, the weight will become impossible to carry. Relationships follow a similar pattern. Healthy closeness grows from 2 people who each possess an inner foundation. Without that foundation, love slowly becomes rescue. Rescue eventually becomes pressure. Pressure quietly becomes distance. One of the greatest gifts you can give another person is not endless attention. It is emotional breathing room. Space where they do not feel constantly evaluated. Space where silence is not interpreted as rejection. Space where they can simply be human. People often confuse space with emotional coldness. They are completely different. Coldness says, "I don't care." Healthy space quietly says, "I trust what we built." Trust changes the atmosphere of every relationship. Without trust, every small misunderstanding feels dangerous. With trust, even difficult conversations become manageable. That is why emotionally independent people often appear stronger during conflict, not because they enjoy disagreement, but because disagreement no longer threatens their identity. They can hear criticism without collapsing. They can apologize without feeling worthless. They can say no without believing they have destroyed the relationship. There is remarkable freedom in that. Imagine how differently your life would feel if one person's disappointment no longer convinced you that you were disappointing. If one rejection no longer became evidence that you were rejectable. If one mistake no longer defined your character. That kind of freedom cannot be given to you by another person. It grows quietly every time you refuse to let a single moment define your entire story. The people you admire most often possess this quality, not because everything always works out for them, but because they remain themselves when it doesn't. They do not become louder. They do not become desperate. They do not abandon their values to recover someone's approval. There is dignity in remaining whole during uncertainty. Others may not always recognize it consciously, but they almost always feel it. And perhaps respect has less to do with appearing impressive than quietly demonstrating that your peace cannot be purchased by approval, nor destroyed by its absence. There is a quiet freedom that arrives when you stop trying to convince everyone to see your value. Most people never notice the exact moment it begins. It doesn't arrive with applause. It doesn't announce itself. It certainly doesn't happen because everyone suddenly starts treating you differently. It begins much more quietly than that. One day, someone misunderstands you, and instead of spending hours rehearsing explanations in your mind, you simply let the misunderstanding exist. Not because you don't care, because you finally understand that not every opinion deserves your emotional energy. That realization feels almost strange at first. For years, you may have believed that being understood was the same as being accepted. So every disagreement became personal. Every criticism felt like something that had to be corrected. Every awkward interaction demanded another conversation. Eventually, you become exhausted, not because people are difficult, but because you have unknowingly accepted a job that was never yours. You have made yourself responsible for managing how everyone sees you. It is impossible. No matter how kind you are, someone will misunderstand your intentions. No matter how honest you are, someone will question your motives. No matter how generous you become, someone will still think you should have given more. The moment you accept this, life becomes surprisingly peaceful. Not because people become easier, but because you stop carrying an impossible burden. Imagine standing beside a lake on a calm morning. You look into the water and see your reflection clearly. Then someone throws a stone into the lake. The surface ripples. Your reflection becomes distorted. Would you assume your face had changed? Of course not. You would understand that the water had been disturbed. Other people's opinions work in much the same way. Sometimes they reflect you accurately. Sometimes they are shaped by their own fears, their own experiences, their own expectations. If you spend your life believing every distorted reflection, you will never know what you truly look like. This is one of the hidden reasons emotionally independent people earn respect. They listen carefully, but they do not surrender themselves to every opinion they hear. They remain teachable without becoming fragile. That balance is rare. Most people lean toward one extreme or the other. Some reject every piece of criticism. Others absorb every negative comment as absolute truth. Neither creates peace. Wisdom quietly lives somewhere in between. It asks, is there something valuable I can learn here? If the answer is yes, learn. If the answer is no, let it pass. Not every voice deserves permanent residence inside your mind. Think about how many conversations you have replayed while lying awake at night. Perhaps someone interrupted you. Perhaps they seemed unimpressed. Perhaps they forgot to reply. Hours later, the conversation is still happening inside your head. Meanwhile, the other person may already be asleep. There's something almost heartbreaking about that. One person has moved on. The other is carrying an invisible weight that exists nowhere except within their own thoughts. Emotional independence quietly interrupts that cycle. It asks a simple question. Will this matter a year from now? Many things won't. The awkward pause. The message you wish you had written differently. The stranger who seemed uninterested. The meeting that didn't go as planned. Life has a remarkable way of reminding us that most moments are smaller than they first appear. Yet while they feel large, they can consume enormous amounts of emotional energy. Energy is one of the most valuable things you possess. Unlike money, you cannot earn more hours in a day. Every minute spent chasing approval is a minute unavailable for creating something meaningful. Reading, learning, building, laughing, resting, being fully present with people who genuinely value your company. Perhaps this is why emotionally independent people often seem more alive. Not because life has been kinder to them, but because they have stopped spending so much of it fighting invisible battles inside their own minds. There's another quiet shift that happens. You stop entering relationships hoping someone will complete you. Instead, you begin asking a different question. Can we help each other become more fully ourselves? That changes everything. Love no longer becomes a rescue mission. Friendship no longer becomes a competition for attention. Work no longer becomes a desperate search for validation. Every relationship begins from abundance rather than lack. Ironically, that is often when people begin feeling most drawn toward you. Not because you are trying harder, because you have stopped asking them to carry your identity. There is something deeply relaxing about being around a person who already knows who they are. They celebrate appreciation, but they do not require constant applause. They enjoy companionship, but they are not frightened by solitude. They welcome affection, but they do not demand proof of it every day. Their calmness spreads quietly. Without realizing it, others begin relaxing around them too. Respect grows in much the same way a tree grows. Slowly, almost invisibly. You rarely notice it happening from one day to the next. Yet over time, its roots become impossible to ignore. The strongest respect is never forced. It cannot be demanded. It cannot be manipulated. It emerges naturally when your actions repeatedly communicate the same quiet message. I know who I am. Not in an arrogant way, not with superiority, simply with peace. That peace has extraordinary influence. It changes how you respond to disappointment, how you handle success, how you love, how you forgive, how you let go. Most importantly, it changes the relationship you have with yourself. Because there comes a day when you realize something you once thought impossible. The person whose acceptance you had been searching for all along was never really another person. It was you. The moment you stop arguing with your own worth, the world becomes a quieter place. Not because everyone suddenly agrees with you, but because their disagreement no longer determines your identity. Perhaps this is why true confidence is so difficult to imitate. It isn't created by louder words, better clothes, or perfect social skills. It grows from a private decision, a decision to remain rooted in your own values, even when applause is absent, even when approval is delayed, even when someone chooses to walk away, because your value was never created by their arrival, and it does not disappear with their departure. Once that truth settles deeply inside you, you begin seeing people differently. You stop asking, how can I make them respect me? And quietly begin living in a way that naturally earns respect without demanding it. That may be one of life's most beautiful paradoxes. The less your peace depends on being admired, the more others begin admiring the peace you carry. And from that quiet place, another truth begins to reveal itself. The people who remain closest to us are rarely those we impress the most. They are the ones who feel safest being completely themselves in our presence. Perhaps lasting connection has never depended on becoming more desirable, but on becoming a place where another human being no longer feels they must pretend. Chapter 5. The Psychology of Scarcity. The strange thing about human desire is that we often notice something most right before we lose it. A conversation that once felt ordinary suddenly becomes precious after it ends. A house you've lived in for years somehow feels more beautiful on the day you're moving out. An old photograph means almost nothing until it becomes the last picture you have of someone. Nothing about those things changed overnight. What changed was your awareness that they might not always be there. Loss has a curious way of sharpening attention. Perhaps you've noticed this in a supermarket. You walk past dozens of products without giving them a second thought. Then you reach for something you always buy, and the shelf is empty. Suddenly, it is the only thing you can think about. You begin searching nearby shelves. Maybe someone placed it in the wrong section. You ask an employee. You consider visiting another store. 5 minutes earlier, that product barely existed in your mind. Now it feels surprisingly important. The object didn't become more valuable. Its availability changed. And with it, your perception changed too. This quiet pattern reaches far beyond supermarket shelves. It follows us into friendships, romantic relationships, careers, even our relationship with time itself. A weekend feels ordinary until Sunday evening arrives. Childhood feels endless until one day you realize it has quietly become a memory. Freedom often feels invisible until something threatens to take it away. The mind pays special attention to what seems uncertain, not because uncertainty is always important, but because uncertainty whispers, "Don't overlook this. You may not have another chance." For thousands of years, that instinct helped human beings survive. Food could disappear. Shelter could disappear. Opportunity could disappear. Those who notice quickly often live longer. The instinct remains with us today. Only now, it is often activated by situations that have little to do with survival. A delayed reply, an invitation that suddenly stops arriving, someone who becomes slightly more distant. Almost immediately, their value begins feeling different. Not necessarily because they changed, but because certainty quietly left the room. Have you ever noticed how a song can play on the radio every day without catching your attention? Then one afternoon, you hear that same song after receiving life-changing news. Suddenly, it becomes unforgettable. Years later, the first few notes transport you back to that exact moment. The music stayed the same. Its meaning changed. Meaning quietly reshapes desire. This explains why many people mistake intensity for love. Someone becomes emotionally unavailable, and suddenly your feeling seems stronger than ever. You think, "I must really love them." Sometimes, what you're feeling isn't deeper love. It is heightened attention. When something becomes less predictable, the mind begins monitoring it more closely. Monitoring often feels like longing. Longing is powerful. Powerful enough to convince you that losing someone has made them more valuable than they ever seemed before. This creates one of the most misunderstood experiences in relationships. Imagine speaking with someone every day. Messages arrive naturally. Conversations flow without effort. Then, almost without warning, the rhythm changes. Replies become shorter. Plans become less frequent. Silences grow longer. Suddenly, you find yourself thinking about them constantly. Many people assume this proves a relationship has become more meaningful. But something else may be happening. The disappearance of certainty has redirected your attention. Attention is like sunlight. Wherever it shines, growth follows. If your attention becomes consumed by uncertainty, uncertainty begins growing larger than life itself. This is why absence sometimes feels so powerful. Not because absence creates value, but because it removes certainty. And the human mind has always been fascinated by unfinished stories. Think about your favorite television series. The episode rarely ends after answering every question. It usually ends with one. A door opens. Someone disappears. An unexpected phone call arrives. You immediately want to know what happens next. Why? Because the mind dislikes unfinished patterns. Relationships often create similar unfinished moments. Someone says, "We'll talk later." But later never comes. Someone starts pulling away without explaining why. Someone who once felt emotionally available suddenly becomes difficult to read. Your mind begins writing possibilities. It searches for missing pieces. It revisits old conversations. It studies details that once seemed meaningless. Hours become days. Days become weeks. The relationship begins occupying far more space inside your thoughts than it ever occupied inside your actual life. That is one of scarcity's quiet illusions. It makes attention feel like affection. Sometimes they overlap. Sometimes they don't. Imagine holding a small flashlight in a dark room. Whatever the beam lands on immediately appears important. Not because it truly is the most important object in the room, but because it is the only thing you can clearly see. Attention works the same way. If uncertainty captures your attention, everything else slowly fades into darkness. Friends who care about you become easier to overlook. Your own goals begin collecting dust. Simple pleasures lose their color. Life quietly shrinks until one unanswered question becomes the center of everything. Very few people recognize this while it is happening. They simply assume, I can't stop thinking about them because they matter so much. Perhaps. But another possibility deserves consideration. Maybe your mind is responding less to who they are and more to the uncertainty surrounding them. That realization changes the way you experience longing. Longing is not always a measure of love. Sometimes it is the mind's attempt to resolve what feels unfinished. This explains why people occasionally spend years thinking about relationships that lasted only a few months, while barely thinking about relationships that lasted many years. Time alone does not determine emotional impact. Unfinished experiences leave surprisingly deep footprints. Life is filled with them. Dreams never pursued. Conversations never finished. Apologies never spoken. Goodbyes that never happened. The heart has a quiet tendency to revisit what never reached a peaceful ending. Perhaps this is why scarcity feels so persuasive. It doesn't simply remove something from your life. It awakens every unfinished feeling connected to it. And unless you understand that process, you may spend years chasing certainty when what you truly need is clarity. One of the greatest misunderstandings about attraction is a belief that people always want what is best for them. If that were true, very few people would stay in unhealthy relationships. Very few would repeatedly choose people who leave them feeling anxious. Very few would ignore those who consistently treat them with kindness. It happens every day, not because people enjoy suffering, but because the mind often mistakes unpredictability for importance. Imagine sitting beside a window during a rainstorm. Raindrops strike the glass one after another. At first, you notice every single one. Then, your attention begins drifting. The pattern becomes familiar. Now imagine that instead of falling continuously, one drop landed every few minutes. You would probably notice each one, not because it was larger, but because it interrupted the pattern. The unexpected naturally attracts attention. Relationships are no different. When affection arrives consistently, many people quietly stop noticing it, not because they're ungrateful, but because certainty allows the mind to relax. When affection becomes unpredictable, attention immediately awakens. Suddenly, every message matters. Every smile feels significant. Every moment together seems more meaningful. This is why inconsistency can become emotionally addictive, not because inconsistency is healthy, but because it keeps the mind searching for patterns. Perhaps you experienced this while scrolling through social media. You keep telling yourself, just one more video, then another appears, and another. Time quietly disappears. What keeps you scrolling isn't knowing exactly what comes next. It is not knowing. The possibility that the next swipe might reveal something wonderful keeps your attention locked in place. Uncertainty creates anticipation. Anticipation quietly fuels persistence. Many people unknowingly recreate this emotional cycle inside relationships. One warm conversation, then silence. One thoughtful message, then distance. One beautiful weekend together, then days of emotional absence. Without realizing it, the mind begins waiting for the next rewarding moment. Each small sign of affection feels even more valuable because it is uncertain. This can be deeply confusing. You begin believing, I've never felt this strongly about anyone before. Sometimes, what you are feeling is not extraordinary compatibility. It is extraordinary unpredictability. The difference matters. One creates peace. The other creates emotional turbulence. And turbulence has a strange way of disguising itself as passion. Have you ever driven through thick fog? Everything becomes slower. You grip the steering wheel more tightly. You focus intensely. Every small movement demands your attention. Now, compare that to driving on a clear afternoon. You remain alert, but far more relaxed. The road did not become less important. It simply became easier to understand. Many relationships feel like driving through emotional fog, not because love is mysterious, but because uncertainty constantly asks you to search for hidden meaning. Why did their tone change? Why did they stop using heart emojis? Why haven't they suggested seeing me again? The mind begins examining tiny details that would have gone unnoticed months earlier. Attention narrows. Perspective shrinks. Soon, one relationship begins occupying nearly every quiet moment of your day. Scarcity has accomplished something remarkable. It has convinced your mind that solving this emotional puzzle deserves priority over everything else. Yet there is another side to scarcity that people rarely discuss. It can also reveal what you have been overlooking. Think about the last time your electricity went out unexpectedly. Within minutes, you became aware of things you had ignored for years. The quiet hum of the refrigerator disappeared. The lights you never consciously appreciated suddenly mattered. Even charging your phone became impossible. The absence revealed the value. Healthy relationships often create this kind of awareness, not because someone is playing games, but because temporary distance reminds you to appreciate what constant availability made easy to forget. There is an enormous difference between intentional space and emotional inconsistency. Space communicates trust. Inconsistency creates confusion. One allows connection to breathe. The other quietly suffocates it. Many people mistake these two experiences because both involve absence. Yet, emotionally, they feel completely different. Imagine someone saying, I have a busy week, but I'd love to see you this weekend. Now compare that with someone who simply disappears without explanation. Both involve waiting. Only one protects emotional safety. The mind responds very differently when uncertainty carries understanding instead of confusion. That is why healthy scarcity never depends on manipulation. It grows naturally from living a full life. People who possess meaningful friendships, purposeful work, personal interests, and quiet confidence are not constantly available, not because they are trying to appear valuable, because they genuinely have lives that require their attention. Ironically, this often makes their attention feel even more meaningful when they freely choose to give it. Real scarcity is never manufactured. It is a natural consequence of living a balanced life. Artificial scarcity eventually reveals itself. People notice when someone delays replies simply to appear important. They sense when affection is being strategically withheld. Control rarely creates lasting admiration. Authenticity does. Perhaps that is why some of the most attractive people are also the least concerned with appearing attractive. They are too busy building meaningful lives. Their attention becomes valuable because it is sincere, not because it is rationed. There is another illusion worth noticing. When something feels scarce, we often overestimate its uniqueness. Imagine walking through a desert, carrying one bottle of water. That bottle feels priceless. Now imagine standing beside a clear mountain stream. Water remains valuable, but fear disappears. Emotionally, many people unknowingly live as though affection exists only in tiny bottles. They believe, if this person leaves, I'll never feel this way again. That belief quietly magnifies attachment. It transforms one relationship into the entire future. Yet life has a remarkable way of reminding us that the heart is capable of loving more than once, trusting more than once, beginning again more than once. Scarcity often convinces us that today's experience is our final opportunity. Reality is usually far more generous than fear allows us to imagine. Perhaps the deepest lesson hidden inside scarcity is not about becoming less available, nor about making others chase you. Perhaps it is learning to distinguish between what is genuinely rare and what only feels rare because fear has narrowed your vision. Because when fear begins deciding what is valuable, even ordinary uncertainty can begin masquerading as extraordinary love, and recognizing that illusion may be the first step towards seeing people not through the lens of scarcity, but through the quiet clarity of reality. Perhaps the greatest illusion scarcity creates is not that something has become more valuable, but you have become less complete without it. That belief changes everything. It changes the way you wake up, the way you look at your phone, the way you walk into a room, even the way you remember the past. Have you ever noticed what happens after a relationship ends? At first, your mind rarely remembers the ordinary moments. It collects the beautiful ones, the long conversations, the laughter, the unexpected kindness, the nights that seemed unforgettable. It quietly places those memories under a bright light while leaving the difficult moments in the shadows. This is one reason letting go can feel almost impossible. You are no longer comparing reality with reality. You are comparing the present with a carefully edited memory. Memory is not a recording. It is a storyteller. And like every storyteller, it chooses what to emphasize. Sometimes it protects you. Other times, it quietly keeps you trapped. Think about an old photograph. Perhaps you find one hidden inside a drawer. You smile immediately. For a moment, it feels as though life was simpler back then. But if you stayed inside that memory long enough, you might also remember the worries you carried during that season, the uncertainty, the disappointments, the questions you thought would never be answered. Those things simply weren't visible in the photograph. The picture captured one moment, not the entire experience. Relationships work the same way. When something becomes scarce, the mind often frames only the brightest moments. That is why people sometimes spend years longing for a relationship that made them anxious most of the time. Scarcity quietly edits the story, and edited stories can become more convincing than reality itself. There's another subtle way scarcity shapes your life. It changes how you see yourself. Imagine spending months trying to earn someone's attention. Every thoughtful message, every kind gesture, every attempt to be understood. Slowly, without realizing it, your own value begins depending on whether those efforts succeed. If they respond warmly, you feel hopeful. If they become distant, you question yourself. Notice what has happened. Their behavior has quietly become the measuring stick for your identity. That is an exhausting way to live, because another human being can never provide stable evidence of your worth. People change. They become busy. They struggle. They make mistakes. Sometimes they leave. If your identity rises and falls with every emotional shift they experience, your peace will always feel temporary. Real freedom begins somewhere unexpected, not when someone finally chooses you, but when you stop believing that your value depends on being chosen. That idea can feel uncomfortable. Many people spend years waiting for one person to prove they're lovable. Yet love has never worked like a certificate. It cannot permanently settle questions that were never created by another person. Imagine standing in front of a mirror. If the mirror becomes dusty, you don't assume your face has changed. You clean the glass. Other people's attention often functions like that mirror. Sometimes it reflects you clearly. Sometimes it reflects their own fears, their distractions, their limitations, their season of life. If you mistake every reflection for absolute truth, you will spend your life trying to polish yourself instead of noticing the mirror. There is something deeply peaceful about no longer treating every rejection as a verdict, a job you didn't get, a friendship that slowly faded, a relationship that came to an end. These experiences matter. They can hurt deeply, but they do not possess the authority to define who you are. Only you quietly hand them that authority. Perhaps this is why two people can experience the same heartbreak, yet emerge completely differently. One concludes, "I was never enough." The other quietly says, "That chapter ended, but my life did not." The pain may be equally real. the meaning becomes entirely different. Meaning quietly determines whether suffering becomes a prison or a teacher. Scarcity also changes the way we see time. When something is ending, we suddenly become fully present. The final day of a holiday, the last evening in a childhood home, the final conversation before someone moves away. Ordinary moments suddenly become unforgettable. Perhaps that should teach us something. Presence should not require endings. We should not have to lose something before learning to see it. Imagine living every ordinary Tuesday with just a little more awareness, not because tomorrow is guaranteed to disappear, but because today has already become yesterday for someone else. There's extraordinary beauty hidden inside ordinary moments. Scarcity simply reminds us to look, yet there is a quieter lesson still. The rarest thing in the world is not another person's attention. It is your own attention. Wherever you place it, your life quietly follows. Spend your attention chasing uncertainty, and uncertainty becomes your world. Spend your attention comparing yourself to everyone else, and comparison quietly steals your joy. Spend your attention building a meaningful life, and meaning slowly begins multiplying. Attention is one of the few treasures that grows whatever it touches. Choose carefully where you invest it. One day, you may notice that someone who once occupied every corner of your thoughts now crosses your mind only occasionally, not because they became less important, but because your own life became larger. Your world expanded. New conversations appeared. New places, new dreams, new versions of yourself. Healing often happens this way, not through forgetting, but through growing. The room inside your heart does not become smaller. Your life simply becomes bigger than the pain that once filled it. Perhaps that is the greatest misunderstanding about scarcity. We spend so much energy fearing what might leave that we overlook everything quietly waiting to enter. New friendships, unexpected opportunities, gentle mornings, meaningful work, quiet confidence, a deeper relationship with yourself. Life rarely empties one hand without inviting you to open the other. But if both hands remain tightly closed around what is disappearing, you cannot receive what is arriving. That is why letting go has never been only about loss. It is also about making space. Space for reality instead of fantasy. Space for gratitude instead of fear. Space for love that feels peaceful instead of uncertain. Space for a life that is not built around chasing what keeps moving away. And perhaps that is the quiet, true scarcity has been trying to teach all along. The most valuable things in life are rarely valuable because they are difficult to obtain. They are valuable because they are deeply real. A sincere conversation, a peaceful mind, mutual trust, a friend who stays, a love that does not require constant guessing. These things cannot be manufactured through distance, or manipulation, or emotional games. They grow slowly, almost invisibly, in the rich soil of honesty, consistency, and quiet presence. Once you begin recognizing that, something remarkable changes. You stop asking, how do I become impossible to lose? And you begin asking a far wiser question. How do I build a life so genuine that I no longer need scarcity to convince me of its value? The answer to that question rarely arrives in a single moment. It reveals itself one ordinary day at a time, one honest conversation, one peaceful decision, one act of self-respect, until eventually you discover that the things truly meant for your life were never asking you to chase them through fear. They were quietly waiting for you to meet them with clarity. And clarity, unlike scarcity, never asks you to lose yourself in order to find what matters. Chapter 6. Stop chasing. Start becoming. There comes a moment in many people's lives when they become tired, not because they have loved too much, but because they have spent too long running after things that keep moving away. At first, it doesn't feel like chasing. It feels like trying harder, sending one more message, explaining yourself one more time, giving one more chance, being a little more patient, a little more understanding, a little more available. You tell yourself that relationships require effort, and they do. But effort and chasing are not the same thing. One builds connection. The other quietly drains it. The difficult part is that the line between them is almost invisible. Imagine standing on a beach as the tide slowly moves away. Without thinking, you take a few steps forward, then a few more, then another. You don't notice how far you've walked until you turn around and realize the shore is now far behind you. Chasing often happens this way, not in one dramatic decision, but through hundreds of tiny ones. Each one feels reasonable on its own. Together, they slowly pull you away from yourself. Perhaps you've experienced this without recognizing it. Someone becomes a little less responsive. You become a little more available. They cancel plans. You stop making plans with other people just in case they suddenly become free. They reply with one sentence. You send 3 thoughtful paragraphs. None of these actions seem extreme, yet they quietly reveal something important. Your life has begun orbiting around another person's choices. That is one of the first signs that chasing has begun. Most people think chasing is something you do with your body, driving across town, calling repeatedly, showing up unexpectedly. Sometimes it is. More often, chasing happens in the mind. It begins the moment another person's attention becomes the center of your emotional world. While making coffee, you're wondering why they haven't replied. While talking with friends, part of your mind is somewhere else. While reading a book, you reread the same page because you're replaying yesterday's conversation instead. The body remains where it is. The mind quietly runs after someone who isn't even present. That kind of chasing is exhausting because there is no finish line. There is always another message to interpret, another silence to explain, another possibility to consider. Eventually, you become physically present, but emotionally absent from your own life. Here is something people rarely notice. The more intensely you chase another person's attention, the less attention you give yourself. That trade happens silently. Hours once spent developing your interests become hours spent checking your phone. Energy once invested in your dreams becomes energy invested in decoding someone else's behavior. Without realizing it, you stop becoming the author of your own story. You become an editor of theirs. Imagine buying a beautiful journal. The first page is blank. The second page is blank. Every page is waiting to become your life. Instead of writing your own experiences, you spend every page trying to predict someone else's next chapter. Eventually, the journal fills. Yet your own story was barely written. Life can become like that, not because someone stole it from you, but because your attention quietly drifted away. Attention is where life happens. Wherever your attention lives, your days quietly follow. There's another quiet truth that almost nobody talks about. People are naturally drawn toward movement, not frantic movement. Growth. Think about the most inspiring people you've ever met. They were usually building something, learning something, creating something, exploring something. Their conversations felt alive because their lives were still expanding. They were becoming. Now imagine someone whose world has become centered around one person. Every conversation circles back to them. Every decision depends on them. Every emotion rises and falls with them. Without intending to, their world begins shrinking, not because they stopped loving life, but because life became concentrated into one relationship. That is a tremendous amount of weight to place on another human being. No one can comfortably carry it forever. One of the great paradoxes of relationships is this: the more complete your life becomes, the less pressure you place on the relationship, and strangely, the healthier the relationship often becomes. Why? Because people feel the difference between being wanted and being needed to hold another person's identity together. Wanted feels warm. Needed can feel heavy. Imagine receiving an invitation from a friend. They say, "I'm going hiking this weekend. I'd love for you to come if you're free." Now imagine another invitation. "Please come. I don't know what I'll do if you don't." Both invitations seek the same outcome, yet emotionally, they feel worlds apart. One offers freedom. The other quietly carries obligation. Human beings naturally move toward freedom, not because they fear commitment, but because freedom allows genuine choice. Choice gives affection its meaning. If kindness is demanded, it no longer feels like kindness. If love is forced, it no longer feels like love. Perhaps this explains something many people struggle to understand. They ask, why did they seem more interested when I stopped chasing? The answer is often misunderstood. It isn't because people enjoy being ignored. It isn't because relationships are games. It is because stopping the chase often means something deeper has changed. You have returned to your own life. You have begun creating instead of waiting. You have remembered that your identity existed long before this relationship did. That quiet shift changes everything. Your conversations become lighter. Your laughter becomes genuine again. Your curiosity returns. You begin making decisions because they reflect your values, not because they might influence someone else's feelings. That kind of authenticity is difficult to imitate because it isn't a strategy. It is a way of living. There is an image that comes to mind. Imagine a garden. If every day you pull on the flowers hoping they will grow faster, you damage them. Growth never responds well to force. Instead, you care for the soil, water the roots, allow sunlight to do its quiet work. Relationships often ask for the same wisdom. You cannot force closeness. You cannot demand trust. You cannot manufacture affection by trying harder than the other person. Some things only grow in an atmosphere free from pressure. Perhaps becoming has always been about tending your own garden. One of the quietest transformations in life is the moment you stop asking, "How do I make them choose me?" and begin asking, "Who am I becoming while I wait?" At first, that question feels unfamiliar. For so long, your attention may have been pointed outward, watching, waiting, interpreting, hoping. Then one ordinary morning, something changes. You wake up, and instead of checking your phone first, you open the window. You notice the air, the silence, the sunlight resting on the buildings across the street. Nothing dramatic has happened. Yet, somehow, you feel a little more present than you did yesterday. That is how becoming usually begins. Not with a breakthrough, but with a return to yourself. People often imagine transformation as a single life-changing decision, a dramatic speech, a powerful realization, an unforgettable moment. Life is rarely that theatrical. More often, transformation arrives disguised as small choices repeated quietly. Reading instead of refreshing your messages. Going for a walk instead of replaying an old conversation. Calling a friend instead of waiting for someone else's attention. Cooking yourself a good meal simply because your body deserves kindness. None of these moments seem extraordinary, yet they slowly teach your mind something it may have forgotten. Your life is still happening, even while someone else's choices remain uncertain. There's a reason this feels so powerful. Attention behaves much like water. Wherever it flows, life begins growing. For weeks, perhaps months, your attention may have flowed almost entirely toward one person. Every emotion, every expectation, every question. Now, little by little, the direction begins changing. You start investing attention into things that quietly invest back into you. Learning, health, friendships, creativity, peace. Unlike chasing, these things rarely leave you emptier than they found you. Imagine planting seeds in two different places. One patch of ground receives water every day. The other receives almost none. Months later, one garden is full of life. The other remains dry. Your inner world grows in much the same way. Whatever receives your consistent attention quietly becomes stronger. If worry receives it, worry grows. If resentment receives it, Resentment grows. If purpose receives it, purpose grows. Most people underestimate this. They believe thoughts simply happen to them. In reality, the thoughts you repeatedly feed begin shaping the person you slowly become. Perhaps you've noticed this after spending time with someone deeply passionate about their work. Their excitement becomes contagious. You leave the conversation feeling more curious than before. Now imagine spending hours every day with someone who complains about everything. Without realizing it, your own outlook begins changing. Attention is contagious. Energy is contagious. Ways of seeing the world are contagious. That includes a relationship you have with yourself. If every day begins with self-criticism, eventually, criticism starts sounding like your own voice. If every mistake becomes evidence that you are failing, failure quietly becomes part of your identity. But something remarkable happens when you begin treating yourself with the same patience you once reserved only for other people. Progress feels lighter. Mistakes become teachers instead of judges. Growth becomes possible. One of the reasons people struggle to stop chasing, it is because it feels slower. Chasing promises immediate relief. Send another message. Maybe they'll answer. Check your phone again. Maybe something changed. Refresh one more time. Maybe today is different. Each action offers a tiny burst of hope. Becoming offers something else. It asks for patience. Read one chapter. Take one walk. Learn one new skill. Keep one promise to yourself. The rewards arrive quietly, almost invisibly, at first. Then one day, you realize you've gone hours without thinking about the person who once occupied every corner of your mind. Not because you force yourself to forget them, because your own life has become interesting again. That is one of the most beautiful forms of healing. Healing is rarely the disappearance of memory. It is the expansion of identity. Imagine looking at the night sky. If you focus on one bright star, everything else disappears into darkness. Now widen your gaze. Suddenly, thousands of stars appear. The first star never vanished. Your perspective simply became larger. Life often heals this way. When one relationship becomes your entire universe, every emotional shift feels enormous. As your world expands, that same experience gradually finds its proper place, still meaningful, but no longer all-consuming. There's another misunderstanding worth exploring. Many people believe becoming is something you do to attract someone back. They start exercising, reading, building a business, learning a language, quietly hoping the other person will notice. That isn't becoming. It is still chasing. Only now, the chase is wearing more impressive clothes. Real becoming begins when no audience is required. Imagine practicing the piano in an empty room. No applause, no compliments, no one recording the performance. You continue anyway, not because someone is watching, but because the music matters to you. That is growth. Growth that depends on witnesses is fragile. Growth that happens in private quietly reshapes your character. Character has an interesting quality. It reveals itself when nobody is paying attention. The promises you keep to yourself, the habits you maintain alone, the kindness you practice toward strangers, the honesty you show when lying would be easier. These invisible moments slowly become visible in everything else. People often say, "You seem different lately." They cannot always explain why. Perhaps your appearance hasn't changed. Your voice sounds the same. Your daily routine looks almost identical. Yet something feels different. What they are sensing is not a new personality. They are sensing someone whose attention has returned home. That creates a quiet steadiness. Steadiness influences every interaction. You stop rushing conversations. You stop trying to fill every silence. You stop needing immediate answers. Ironically, the less desperate you become for certainty, the more peaceful uncertainty begins feeling. Life has always contained uncertainty. The difference is that now, it no longer controls the direction of your day. You are becoming someone who can continue walking, even without knowing exactly what lies around the next corner. And perhaps that is one of the greatest freedoms a person can ever discover. Because the strongest version of you is not the one who finally convinces everyone to stay. It is the one who keeps becoming, even while life remains beautifully uncertain. One day, without planning it, you will notice something surprising. The person who once occupied your thoughts from morning until night no longer arrives every hour. Perhaps they still cross your mind, but now the thought passes like a cloud instead of becoming a storm. That change often feels so quiet that many people miss it. They assume healing should feel dramatic. They expect one powerful morning when they wake up completely different. Life rarely changes that way. Real change is almost silent. It happens while you're making breakfast, while reading a book before bed, while laughing with a friend, while walking home after work. The moments themselves seem ordinary. Only later do you realize something inside you has become lighter. One of the reasons becoming is so powerful is because it slowly replaces desperation with direction. Desperation keeps asking, how do I stop this feeling? Direction quietly asks, who am I building? Those questions create completely different lives. Imagine standing in the middle of the ocean. If you have no destination, every wave feels like a problem. Every change in the wind feels frightening. Now imagine sailing toward a distant shore. The waves still exist. The wind still changes. But now, everything has meaning because you know where you're going. Purpose has an extraordinary effect on emotional pain. It doesn't always remove it, but it prevents pain from becoming your identity. Without purpose, heartbreak can become an entire personality. With purpose, heartbreak becomes one chapter inside a much larger story. That is an important difference. Perhaps you've met people who seem remarkably resilient. Life has disappointed them. People have left. Dreams have changed. Yet they continue moving forward with quiet strength. Many assume they simply feel less pain. Often, they don't. They have simply learned something that many people never discover. They understand that pain and purpose can exist at the same time. You do not have to wait until every wound has healed before continuing your life. You can build while grieving. You can learn while uncertain. You can smile while still carrying unanswered questions. Human beings are capable of holding more than one truth at once. That realization quietly changes everything. There is another shift that happens when you stop chasing. You begin noticing opportunities that fear once hid from you. When your attention was consumed by one relationship, entire parts of life became almost invisible. Conversations you never started, places you never visited, skills you never developed, people who quietly appreciated you. Your world had become so narrow that abundance looked like scarcity. Now, as your attention expands, life begins revealing how much was waiting patiently all along. Think about walking through a forest while staring only at the ground. You would notice every stone, every fallen leaf, every root, but you would completely miss the towering trees above you, the birds, the changing light, the open sky. Attention determines experience. Change your attention, and you quietly change your world. This is why becoming is never only about relationships. It transforms the way you experience everything. You become more curious, more patient, more present. You begin listening to people instead of wondering what they think about you. You begin enjoying moments instead of measuring them. You begin making choices because they reflect your values, not because they might earn approval. There's tremendous peace in that. People often believe they must become extraordinary before they deserve happiness. They tell themselves, once I find the right relationship, once I become successful, once someone finally chooses me, then life will begin. But life has been happening the entire time. It was waiting while you postponed your joy, waiting while you searched for permission to feel complete. The truth is gentler than that. Wholeness is not a reward at the end of the journey. It is the way you choose to walk the journey itself. Imagine carrying a lantern through a dark path. The lantern doesn't illuminate the entire road. It only lights the next few steps. Yet those few steps are enough. Life often unfolds in the same quiet way. You rarely receive certainty about the entire future. You receive enough clarity for today, enough courage for the next conversation, enough strength for the next decision. The rest reveals itself as you continue walking. There is another beautiful paradox hidden inside becoming. When you stop trying to be endlessly impressive, you become more genuine. When you stop rehearsing every conversation, you become easier to talk to. When you stop fearing rejection, you become more honest. Authenticity has a calmness that performance can never imitate. Performance is always watching itself. Authenticity simply lives. People feel that difference. Perhaps not immediately, but consistently. Because genuine presence creates something that manipulation never can. Trust. Trust cannot be demanded. It cannot be rushed. It cannot be engineered through clever words. It grows quietly every time your actions remain consistent with who you truly are. That consistency begins with yourself. Every promise you keep to your own heart becomes another stone in the foundation beneath your feet. Every boundary you respectfully maintain strengthens your sense of self. Every difficult truth you choose instead of comfortable pretending brings you closer to a life that feels real. Real lives are rarely perfect. They are simply honest. There will still be days when loneliness appears unexpectedly. A familiar song may bring back old memories. A photograph may stir emotions you thought had disappeared. That does not mean you are moving backward. It means you are human. Healing is not the absence of feeling. It is the absence of being ruled by every feeling that appears. One day, you will sit quietly with your morning coffee, or drive home after a long day, or watch rain gather on your window, and you will realize something that once seemed impossible. Your peace no longer depends on someone else's next decision. That freedom cannot be given to you. It cannot be bought. It cannot be borrowed. It is built slowly, patiently, one ordinary choice at a time. And perhaps that is what becoming has always meant. Not creating a new version of yourself, but uncovering the person who existed long before fear convinced you that you were incomplete. The person who could laugh without needing permission, who could dream without waiting for approval, who could love deeply without disappearing inside another person's life. That person has never been lost, only distracted. Now, your attention has found its way home. And once your attention returns, something remarkable becomes possible. You stop chasing what continually moves away and begin walking toward the life that has quietly been waiting for you all along. Because the greatest transformation is rarely found in finally catching someone else's attention. It is found in becoming someone whose life is so deeply rooted in purpose, peace, and self-respect that you no longer need to chase what was never meant to be pursued. From that place, love becomes a choice instead of a rescue. Connection becomes a gift instead of a dependency. And every relationship begins with the quiet confidence of two people walking beside one another, not because either one is afraid to walk alone, but because both have already discovered the strength of becoming themselves. Chapter 7. Your identity creates your relationships. Long before you choose the people who enter your life, something else has already made a decision. The decision is so quiet, so familiar, that most people never realize it is happening. You think you're choosing relationships, but very often, your identity is choosing them for you. That sounds strange at first. After all, you decide who to text, who to date, who to trust, who to spend your weekends with. Those all feel like conscious choices. Yet if you look closely, you may notice a pattern that keeps repeating itself. Different faces, different voices, different places, but somehow, the emotional experience feels familiar. Perhaps you've said something like, "Why do I always attract emotionally unavailable people?" Or, "Why do my friendships always end the same way?" Or, "Why do I keep giving everything to people who eventually leave?" It is tempting to believe life is simply unlucky. Sometimes, there is an easier explanation. Not easier because it is simple, but because it quietly exists beneath the surface. Imagine wearing a pair of glasses with slightly tinted lenses. At first, you barely notice the color. After a while, you completely forget the glasses are even there. The world simply looks normal. Only when someone else puts them on do you realize everything has been slightly altered. Identity works much the same way. It becomes so familiar that you mistake it for reality itself. If, deep inside, you quietly believe, "I have to earn love," you may naturally feel drawn toward people whose affection feels difficult to receive, not because they are better for you, because they fit a story you have unknowingly carried for years. The familiar often feels safer than the healthy. That is one of the great paradoxes of being human. Safety is not always found in what is good for us. Sometimes it is found in what we already understand. Think about walking into your childhood home after many years away. The furniture may have changed. The walls may have been painted. Yet something still feels familiar. Your body relaxes before your mind even catches up. Relationships can create that same feeling. Sometimes you meet someone, and without knowing why, they feel strangely familiar. Not because you have met them before, but because the emotional atmosphere reminds you of something your heart already knows. That can be beautiful. It can also be dangerous. Familiarity is not proof of compatibility. Sometimes it is simply recognition of an old emotional pattern. Perhaps you experienced this after hearing someone's tone change. Nothing dramatic happened, just a slight shift, a little colder, a little more distant. Almost instantly, your mood changes. You begin wondering what went wrong. You replay your last conversation. You search for mistakes. To someone else, the same moment might seem insignificant. To you, it feels enormous. Why? Because certain experiences do not arrive alone. They awaken older experiences that quietly resemble them. A single moment becomes connected to years of emotional memory. Without realizing it, you begin responding not only to what is happening, but to everything that ever felt like it. That is how identity quietly shapes relationships. It decides what feels normal. Imagine listening to the same song every morning for months. Eventually, the melody becomes part of your routine. One day it stops playing. Something feels missing, not because it was your favorite song, but because your mind quietly expected it. Identity creates similar expectations. If chaos has always felt normal, peace may initially feel unfamiliar. If uncertainty has always surrounded love, consistency may feel strangely boring. Many people mistake emotional excitement for compatibility. Yet excitement is not always created by connection. Sometimes it is created by unpredictability. There is another pattern that quietly influences nearly every relationship. People often try to become someone they believe will finally be loved. A little quieter, a little funnier, a little more agreeable, a little less emotional, a little more successful. Little by little, their real personality becomes covered by layers of adaptation. The strange thing is, most of these changes happen with good intentions. You simply want relationships to work. You simply want peace. You simply don't want to lose someone important. Yet every small adjustment asks the same silent question. Who do I need to become so they will stay? That question quietly shapes identity. Eventually, you stop asking what you actually want. You begin asking what everyone else expects. That is an exhausting way to live, because expectations constantly change. One person wants you to speak more. Another wants you to speak less. One admires your ambition. Another finds it intimidating. One appreciates your sensitivity. Another calls it weakness. If your identity depends on satisfying everyone, you will spend your life changing costumes without ever feeling at home inside any of them. There is something deeply peaceful about meeting someone who allows you to remove those costumes. Someone beside whom your laughter sounds natural. Your silence feels comfortable. Your opinions do not require constant editing. You leave the conversation feeling more like yourself, not less. Those relationships rarely begin with performance. They begin with recognition, not recognition of old wounds, recognition of your authentic self. That kind of connection feels different. It doesn't ask you to become someone new. It quietly gives you permission to become more fully who you already are. Perhaps that is why some relationships feel strangely effortless. Not because they never require work, but because they do not require pretending. Imagine tending a garden. You would never expect a rose to become an oak tree, or an oak tree to become lavender. Each grows according to its nature. People often forget to extend themselves the same kindness. They spend years trying to become someone else's ideal, instead of growing into their own deepest character. Relationships built on performance eventually become exhausting. Relationships built on authenticity become sustainable. Not because authenticity guarantees everyone will stay, but because even if someone leaves, you still recognize the person looking back at you in the mirror. That may be one of the greatest forms of emotional security life can offer, because when your identity remains rooted inside yourself, relationships become places where you express who you are, not places. There's a question most people never think to ask. Not, why did this relationship fail? But, who was I becoming while I was inside it? Those questions lead to very different answers. The first keeps your attention on events. The second quietly reveals patterns. Imagine reading the same book several times over many years. The words remain exactly the same. Yet, somehow, the story feels different every time. Why? Because the book has not changed. You have. The reader always influences the meaning. Relationships work in much the same way. The same conversation can feel comforting to one person and threatening to another. The same silence can feel peaceful or frightening. The same disagreement can become an opportunity for honesty or the beginning of emotional distance. The event is only part of the story. The person experiencing it quietly completes the rest. That is why identity matters so deeply. Identity decides what everything means. Perhaps you've noticed how differently people react to compliments. One person smiles and simply says, "Thank you." Another immediately replies, "It wasn't that good," or "I just got lucky." The compliment is identical, yet one person accepts it, while the other quietly pushes it away. Not because they're trying to be humble, because deep inside, the compliment does not match the story they believe about themselves. The mind has a curious habit. It welcomes information that agrees with identity and quietly questions anything that doesn't. If someone secretly believes they are difficult to love, affection can feel suspicious. If someone quietly believes they are unworthy, kindness may feel temporary. Not because the other person is insincere, but because accepting love requires accepting a different story about yourself. Sometimes that is harder than letting love go. There's another hidden reason people repeat relationship patterns. Identity prefers what feels familiar, even when familiar brings pain. Think about learning to drive. At first, every movement demands your full attention. The mirrors, the pedals, the steering wheel. Months later, many of those actions happen automatically. Your body remembers. Relationships create similar habits. Without realizing it, you develop emotional routines. How quickly you apologize. How often you explain yourself. Whether you speak honestly or stay silent. Whether you ask directly or quietly hope someone notices your needs. These responses become so automatic, they begin feeling like personality. Yet many of them were simply practiced long enough to become familiar. That means something extraordinary. If they were learned, they can also be changed. Not overnight, not through force, but through awareness. Awareness interrupts repetition. Imagine walking the same path through a forest every day. Eventually, the trail becomes clear, easy, comfortable. Now imagine deciding to create a different path. At first, it feels awkward. Branches block your way. Tall grass slows your steps. Your old path seems much easier. That is exactly how change feels. Not because the new direction is wrong, but because your mind has spent years strengthening the old one. Many people mistake discomfort for evidence they should turn back. Sometimes, discomfort is simply proof that you are walking somewhere new. There is another quiet truth hiding beneath identity. You don't only choose relationships. You teach people how to relate to you, not through speeches, not through rules, through repetition. Imagine someone interrupts you every time you speak. The first time, you laugh it off. The second, you stay quiet. The third, you stop sharing your thoughts altogether, without saying a word. A pattern has been created. Now imagine something different. Someone interrupts. You smile gently and say, "I'd like to finish my thought." No anger, no performance, just honesty. That single moment quietly teaches people something. It teaches them how you expect to be treated. Identity is revealed through moments exactly like these, not when everything is easy, but when something important is at risk. Many people believe confidence is built by winning. Often, confidence is built by keeping small promises to yourself, speaking when your voice shakes, leaving when respect disappears, resting without feeling guilty, choosing honesty instead of approval. Each decision whispers something back to your own mind. This is who we are now. Identity is listening. Every day, every choice becomes evidence. Imagine placing one brick on top of another. One brick seems insignificant. By itself, it changes nothing. Months later, those bricks have become a house. Identity grows that quietly, not through dramatic declarations, but through ordinary decisions repeated consistently. Perhaps that is why lasting change feels almost invisible while it's happening. One healthy boundary, one honest conversation, one afternoon spent investing in yourself instead of chasing reassurance. None of those moments feel life-changing. Together, they quietly transform the person making them. Eventually, other people begin noticing. They say, "You seem calmer. You don't overthink things as much anymore. Something about you has changed." What they are seeing is not a new mask. They're seeing old masks beginning to fall away. There's something deeply attractive about someone who no longer needs to pretend. Not because they have become perfect, but because they have become consistent. Consistency creates trust. Trust creates safety. Safety allows love to grow. Perhaps that is why some people feel immediately comforting. Not because they always know the right words, but because their actions rarely contradict them. Their identity quietly speaks before they ever open their mouth. That is a remarkable kind of influence. It cannot be borrowed. It cannot be performed. It can only be lived. And perhaps that is where every lasting relationship quietly begins, not with finding someone who finally changes your identity, but with becoming someone whose identity no longer changes every time someone else walks into the room. There's a quiet freedom that arrives when you stop introducing yourself through your past. Most people never notice how often they do it, not with words, but with expectations. Someone disappoints them, and they quietly expect everyone else to do the same. Someone betrays their trust, and every new relationship is asked to carry the weight of an old wound. Someone leaves without explanation, and every delayed reply begins to feel like another goodbye. The people change. The story remains. That is how identity quietly protects itself. It says, "This happened before. Be careful." At first, that voice seems wise. After all, experience should teach us something. It should help us recognize what is healthy and what is not. But there's a difference between learning from the past and living inside it. Imagine driving while looking only into the rearview mirror. The mirror is useful. It helps you understand where you've been. But if it becomes the only place you look, even the clearest road ahead becomes dangerous. Some people spend years trying to build new relationships while staring almost entirely at old experiences. Without realizing it, they are responding to memories more than to people. Perhaps that explains why trust can sometimes feel so difficult. It isn't always because the person standing in front of you is untrustworthy. Sometimes the person standing behind you still has too much influence. Not physically, emotionally. Their absence continues shaping your reactions. Their words continue echoing inside ordinary conversations. Their choices quietly become the standard by which everyone else is measured. That is an incredibly heavy burden for new relationships to carry. No one should have to prove they are different from people they have never met. Yet this happens every day. There's another hidden way identity shapes connection. It quietly decides what kind of love feels believable. Imagine someone looks at you with genuine admiration. They appreciate your kindness, your honesty, your presence. Instead of simply receiving it, you immediately search for a reason they must be mistaken. If they really knew me, they'll change their mind eventually. They're only being nice. Notice what happened. The problem was never the compliment. The problem was that it collided with an identity that had never learned how to receive it. Many people believe receiving love should be effortless. Sometimes, receiving is more difficult than giving. Giving feels active. It creates a sense of control. Receiving asks for something quieter. It asks you to believe you are already worthy without proving it first. That can feel unfamiliar, especially if you spent years believing love must always be earned. Perhaps you've seen this in ordinary moments. Someone offers help. Your first response is, "No, I'm fine." Someone wants to support you. You immediately worry about becoming a burden. Someone sincerely thanks you. You quickly change the subject. None of these responses seem important on their own. Yet, together, they quietly reveal the story you believe about yourself. Identity often speaks most clearly through the things we struggle to accept. There is another realization that surprises many people. Healthy relationships rarely force you to become someone completely different. Instead, they gently reveal parts of yourself that were already there. Think about sunlight falling across a landscape early in the morning. The mountains were always there. The trees, the river. The light did not create them. It simply made them easier to see. Good relationships often work like that. They don't manufacture your confidence. They reveal it. They don't create your kindness. They invite it. They don't invent your peace. They make it easier to experience. That is very different from relationships that constantly require performance. Performance is exhausting. You measure every sentence. You rehearse every conversation before it happens. You wonder whether you are too much or not enough. You become an actor inside your own life. Actors eventually leave the stage. Real people have to keep living. One of the quietest signs that your identity is becoming healthier is that you become less interested in impressing people. Not because you stop caring, because you stop believing your worth depends on their approval. Imagine walking into a room full of strangers. Years ago, you might have wondered, do they like me? Now, without arrogance, without indifference, a different question quietly appears. Do I feel like myself here? That is an extraordinary shift. One question asks for permission. The other quietly protects authenticity. People often assume identity is something they discover once and then keep forever. Life is much gentler than that. Identity is more like a garden. It is always growing, always responding to what receives your attention. If you water resentment, resentment grows. If you water fear, fear grows. If you water honesty, honesty quietly spreads into every corner of your life. The remarkable thing is that relationships become healthier almost automatically, not because you learn clever techniques, because healthier people naturally create healthier patterns. You stop apologizing for having needs. You stop chasing conversations that clearly ended. You stop explaining yourself to people determined to misunderstand you. You stop confusing inconsistency with mystery. You stop calling emotional exhaustion love. Those changes do not happen because someone teaches you new rules. They happen because your identity quietly stops accepting what once felt normal. There's tremendous peace in that. Peace is often misunderstood. People imagine it as the absence of conflict. Real peace feels different. It is the absence of constant inner negotiation. You no longer argue with yourself about whether you deserve respect. You no longer debate whether your feelings are allowed to exist. You no longer shrink simply because someone else becomes uncomfortable. You remain kind. You remain open, but you also remain yourself. That balance changes every relationship you will ever have, because people are not only responding to your words, They are responding to the life those words come from. Perhaps this is why two people can say exactly the same sentence, yet it feels completely different. One speaks from fear. The other speaks from quiet certainty. The words may sound almost identical. The identity behind them changes everything. And perhaps that is the deepest truth of all. Your relationships will never consistently rise above the way you quietly see yourself. If you believe you must constantly earn your place, you will keep working for love that asks you to rest. If you believe your voice does not matter, you will keep disappearing in side conversations. If you believe peace must be sacrificed to keep people close, you will keep confusing emotional struggle with emotional depth. But the moment your identity begins changing, everything else begins changing with it. Not all at once, not dramatically, quietly, like dawn arriving over a sleeping city. At first, only the horizon changes, then the rooftops, then the streets. Then every window slowly begins reflecting light. Nothing was forced, nothing rushed. The darkness simply lost its place. Perhaps that is how every meaningful relationship truly begins. Not the day two people meet, but the day one person quietly stops searching for someone to complete them and starts becoming someone who can finally share a complete life. Because love has always been shaped by something deeper than attraction. It quietly follows identity. And wherever identity learns to rest in honesty, self-respect, and quiet authenticity, relationships begin to feel less like places where you lose yourself, and more like places where you are finally free to be fully seen. Chapter 8. The hidden signals you send. You begin speaking long before you say your first word. Most people never notice this. They believe communication starts the moment a conversation begins. When someone says, "Hello, how are you? It's nice to meet you." But by then, something important has already happened. The room has quietly formed its first impression. Not because people are judging you harshly, but because human beings are constantly reading what is difficult to explain. A pause, a glance, the rhythm of your walk, the way you enter a room, whether your shoulders seem relaxed or as if they are carrying an invisible weight. Most of these things happen without conscious effort. That is why they are so revealing. Imagine walking into a cafe. Someone looks up for just a second before returning to their coffee. Neither of you speaks, yet somehow you feel as though an entire conversation has already taken place. You sense whether they seemed hurried, calm, curious, distracted, welcoming, or emotionally somewhere else. No words were exchanged. Still, information was shared. Life is full of moments like this. You have experienced them more times than you realize. You answer a phone call. Before the first sentence is finished, you already know something feels different. Nothing obvious has changed. The words are ordinary, yet the voice carries something unfamiliar. A little flatter, a little heavier, a little more distant. You immediately begin asking yourself, is everything okay? It is remarkable how much we understand without language. Even more remarkable, how often we ignore it. People usually trust spoken words more than quiet signals. Someone says, "I'm fine," so we accept it, even when their eyes look tired. Their laughter feels forced. Their silence lasts a little longer than usual. Words often tell us what people wish to communicate. The quieter signals reveal where they truly are. The same is true for you. Whether you realize it or not, you are constantly sending messages that have nothing to do with the sentences leaving your mouth. Imagine apologizing. One person says, "I'm sorry." Their voice softens. Their eyes remain present. They allow silence after the words. Another person says exactly the same sentence, but they immediately look away. Their tone feels impatient. Their body has already turned toward the door. The words are identical. The meaning feels completely different. Why? Because people listen with more than their ears. There's another hidden layer beneath this. The signals you send rarely begin in your body. They begin much earlier. They begin inside the conversations you have with yourself. Suppose you're walking into an important meeting. If your mind has spent the past hour quietly repeating, "Don't embarrass yourself. Don't say anything stupid. Everyone probably knows more than you." something interesting happens. Your body begins responding to those private thoughts. Your shoulders tighten. Your breathing changes. Your smile becomes hesitant. You begin speaking a little faster. You avoid eye contact without intending to. Nothing about those behaviors is planned. They simply reflect the emotional climate already happening inside you. Now imagine walking into the same meeting after reminding yourself of something different. I don't need to impress anyone. I'm here to contribute honestly. Curiosity matters more than perfection. The room has not changed. The people have not changed. Yet somehow, you have. Your body quietly follows the story your mind believes. This happens everywhere. During first dates. Job interviews, family dinners, phone calls, ordinary conversations in the supermarket, even while ordering coffee. People often think confidence is something others give to you. Sometimes, confidence is simply what becomes visible after fear stops giving instructions. That is an entirely different way of looking at it. Perhaps you've noticed this while watching children. Very young children rarely wonder whether their laughter sounds strange. They dance before music has even started. They ask unexpected questions. They wave enthusiastically at strangers. Most of them have not yet learned to perform. Somewhere along the way, many adults begin replacing expression with calculation. Will this sound intelligent? Should I say less? What do they think, I'm awkward? Those questions seem harmless. Yet every one of them quietly interrupts presence. Instead of experiencing the moment, you begin observing yourself inside it. Imagine trying to enjoy a beautiful sunset while constantly checking whether other people notice how much you're enjoying it. Eventually, the sunset disappears behind self-consciousness. Conversations often disappear the same way. There is another hidden signal that almost everyone sends without realizing it: the need for immediate reassurance. You send a message. Minutes pass. Nothing. You check your phone again. Then again. Then you begin imagining explanations. Perhaps they're upset. Perhaps you said something wrong. Perhaps they're losing interest. Hours later, they reply warmly. They were simply busy. Notice what happened. Nothing in reality changed. Yet your inner world traveled an enormous distance. If this happens often, it quietly changes how you communicate. Your next message becomes more careful, more edited, more designed to prevent silence. Little by little, authenticity begins giving way to anxiety. The other person may never know why. They simply sense something feels slightly constrained. Hidden signals often begin this quietly. There is something fascinating about genuine ease. You can usually recognize it within moments. Someone enters a room. They do not rush. They do not demand attention. They do not seem eager to prove themselves. Yet, people naturally begin listening. Why? Not because they are louder, often because they are more present. Presence is surprisingly rare. Many conversations involve two people waiting for their turn to speak. Others involve one person wondering whether they're being judged. Very few involve two people fully arriving in the same moment. That kind of attention feels memorable, not because it is dramatic, because it is increasingly uncommon. Imagine talking with someone who never checks their phone while you're speaking. They don't interrupt. They don't scan the room. looking for someone more interesting. For those few minutes, you feel like the only person who exists. Most people remember that feeling long after they've. There is something people notice about you that you will probably never see, not because it is invisible, but because you are too close to it. Just as you cannot easily see your own eyes without a mirror, you rarely notice the emotional atmosphere you carry into a room. Other people do, sometimes within seconds. Imagine arriving at a dinner where everyone is already seated. Before you pull out your chair, before you introduce yourself, before the first conversation begins, the room has already begun responding to you, not in dramatic ways, in quiet ones. Someone smiles a little more openly. Another person relaxes. Someone else becomes unexpectedly reserved. None of these reactions happen because people have reached conclusions about your character. They are responding to the emotional weather they sense around you. Every person carries emotional weather. Some people feel like a calm morning. Others feel like a coming storm. Some feel hurried. Others feel grounded. The remarkable thing is that very few people choose the weather they bring. They simply carry whatever has been happening inside them all day. Perhaps you experienced this yourself. Someone walks into work without saying much. Nothing seems obviously wrong, yet the entire office feels different. Conversations become shorter. Laughter becomes quieter. Everyone begins moving a little more carefully. Hours later, you discover they were carrying stress from something that happened long before they arrived. The stress was never announced. It was simply present. Emotions rarely stay contained inside the person experiencing them. They quietly spread. Imagine placing one drop of ink into a glass of water. The drop doesn't remain in one corner. Slowly, almost patiently, it begins reaching every part of the glass. The same thing happens with emotional states. Peace spreads. Anxiety spreads. Patience spreads. Impatience spreads. That is why your inner life matters far more than most people realize. It is never entirely private, not because people can read your thoughts, but because thoughts quietly shape behavior. Behavior shapes atmosphere. Atmosphere shapes relationships. One unnoticed thought can begin a chain that reaches far beyond the moment it first appeared. There is another hidden signal that quietly influences almost every conversation: the need to be believed. Imagine telling someone about a difficult experience. As you speak, you begin adding extra details, explaining every small decision, justifying every feeling. Try and make absolutely certain they understand your side. The conversation slowly becomes less about sharing and more about proving. Most people have done this, not because they enjoy over-explaining, because somewhere inside, they fear being misunderstood. That fear changes the rhythm of communication. You begin answering questions nobody asked. You apologize before expressing an opinion. You soften statements that don't need softening. You defend choices that require no defense. The words seem harmless, yet they quietly communicate something deeper. I'm not sure my perspective is enough on its own. People often assume confidence is shown by speaking more. Sometimes, confidence appears through what no longer needs to be said. Imagine placing a beautiful painting on a wall. If every visitor asks about it, you simply smile. You don't spend 20 minutes convincing them it deserves to exist. The painting speaks for itself. There comes a point where your life begins working the same way. You stop trying to persuade everyone that your choices make sense. Not because you become indifferent, because your identity no longer depends on unanimous agreement. That quiet certainty changes the way people experience you. There is another signal that often goes unnoticed: the pace at which you respond, not only to messages, but to life itself. Someone disagrees with you. Do you answer immediately, or do you allow yourself a moment to think? Someone criticizes you. Do you instantly defend yourself, or become curious first? Someone changes plans unexpectedly. Do you react before understanding, or pause long enough to see the whole picture? That small space between what happens and what you choose next may be one of the most powerful signals you ever send. Most people live as though every feeling requires an immediate response. A message arrives. Reply now. An opinion appears online. Respond immediately. Someone speaks sharply. Return the same energy. Life becomes a series of emotional reflexes. Yet the calmest people often have one habit in common. They create space. Imagine driving through heavy rain. You naturally slow down, not because you are afraid of driving, because clear vision requires a little more care. Emotional moments deserve the same wisdom. Slowing down often prevents collisions that speed would have created. Perhaps this explains why some conversations leave you feeling unexpectedly safe. The other person doesn't rush to judge. They don't interrupt your emotions with quick advice. They don't immediately compare your experience to their own. They simply remain present long enough for understanding to appear. That patience becomes its own form of communication. It quietly says, "You don't have to hurry here." There is something deeply comforting about people who are not constantly rushing. Not just physically, emotionally. They do not rush intimacy. They do not rush trust. They do not rush forgiveness. They understand that meaningful things grow at the speed of reality, not at the speed of anxiety. Think about making tea. Pouring boiling water over the leaves is only the beginning. If you remove the tea bag after a few seconds, the flavor never has time to develop. Some parts of life cannot be hurried. Conversation is one of them. Trust is another. Love certainly is. The hidden signals you send are shaped by your relationship with time. If you believe everything important must happen immediately, your conversations often carry quiet urgency. If you trust that what is genuine can unfold naturally, people begin sensing that steadiness. They breathe a little easier around you. There is another hidden signal that changes relationships in ways few people recognize: your willingness to be wrong. Imagine someone points out a mistake you made. For a moment, your pride feels uncomfortable. You have two choices: protect your image or protect your growth. Many people believe admitting mistakes makes them appear weak. Strangely, the opposite is often true. There is something deeply reassuring about someone who can quietly say, "You're right. I hadn't thought of it that way." No performance, no excuses, no endless explanation, just honesty. That kind of honesty communicates extraordinary strength because it reveals someone who values truth more than appearance. People trust that, not because perfection creates trust, but because humility does. There's a final realization hidden beneath all these quiet signals. You are teaching people how it feels to be around you, not through carefully chosen words, not through impressive stories, not through polished opinions, through the emotional environment your presence creates. Some people leave conversations feeling judged. Others leave feeling lighter. Some feel exhausted. Others feel understood. Long after your exact words have faded, that feeling quietly remains. Perhaps this is why the most unforgettable people are rarely the loudest. They're the ones whose presence feels like permission. Permission to speak honestly. Permission to laugh freely. Permission to pause without embarrassment. Permission to be imperfect without fear. And that kind of presence cannot be manufactured. It grows naturally from a person who has stopped fighting themselves. Because the hidden signals you send to the world will always begin with the quiet signals you send to your own heart. There is one signal you send every day, whether you realize it or not. It has nothing to do with your appearance, nothing to do with your education, nothing to do with your success. It is the answer to one quiet question. How do you treat yourself when nobody is watching? That answer follows you everywhere. People may never know your private routines. They may never see the thoughts that visit you before you fall asleep. They may never hear the conversations you have inside your own mind. And yet, somehow, they experience the results of those conversations. Imagine two people walking into the same room. Both smile. Both shake hands. Both introduce themselves politely. From a distance, they appear almost identical. Spend an hour with them, and the difference slowly becomes clear. One listens because they are genuinely interested. The other listens while preparing what to say next. One asks questions because they enjoy understanding people. The other asks questions because they want to be liked. The actions seem almost the same. The intention quietly changes everything. People are remarkably sensitive to intention, not because they consciously analyze it, but because intention changes hundreds of tiny behaviors. The length of a pause, the warmth in a voice, the patience to let someone finish speaking, the willingness to admit uncertainty, the ability to celebrate someone else's success without secretly comparing it to your own. These moments are too small to fake consistently. Eventually, your inner world always finds its way into your outer behavior. That is why lasting change never begins with learning better social techniques. It begins with becoming more honest inside yourself. There's another signal that quietly shapes every relationship: how much room you allow other people to exist as they truly are. Think about how often people enter conversations carrying invisible expectations. They should understand me without my saying anything. They should reply faster. They should think the way I think. They should express love exactly as I do. Most disappointment begins in that quiet little word, should. It appears harmless, yet it quietly transforms people into projects. Instead of seeing who someone is, you begin measuring them against who you hope they would become. That creates distance long before conflict appears. Imagine buying a plant because you love flowers. Months pass. You become frustrated that it never blooms. You water it, move it closer to the window, give it fertilizer. Nothing changes. Finally, someone gently points out that it was never meant to produce flowers. It is an evergreen. The disappointment was never caused by the plant. It came from expecting it to become something it was never designed to be. Relationships often suffer in the same quiet way. The hidden signal you send is not only how you see yourself, it is whether you truly allow other people to be themselves. Acceptance is deeply misunderstood. It does not mean tolerating disrespect. It does not mean ignoring harmful behavior. It simply means seeing reality before trying to change it. Reality is always the strongest place from which to make wise decisions. Denial rarely protects us. It usually delays clarity. There is another signal that almost everyone overlooks: your relationship with uncertainty. Imagine sending an important message. You set your phone down. Nothing happens. 5 minutes pass. Then 10. Then 30. One person thinks, they're probably busy. Another thinks, I must have done something wrong. A third becomes irritated. A fourth hardly notices. The same silence, for completely different experiences. The difference was never the unanswered message. The difference was the meaning each person quietly attached to it. Meaning is one of the strongest hidden signals you send. People can often sense whether your mind naturally leans toward trust, or toward fear, toward curiosity, or toward suspicion, toward generosity, or toward defensiveness. Those habits quietly shape every conversation before it even begins. Perhaps this explains why two people can walk away from the same interaction remembering entirely different experiences. One remembers warmth. The other remembers criticism. One remembers connection. The other remembers distance. Our inner world quietly edits reality long before memory stores it. There is something deeply peaceful about becoming someone who no longer rushes to create negative stories. Not because life becomes perfect, because you recognize how often the first explanation is incomplete. Someone seems distracted. Perhaps they are carrying a difficult day. A friend forgets to call. Perhaps life simply became overwhelming. Someone's tone feels different. Perhaps it has nothing to do with you. Curiosity creates emotional space. Fear quickly fills every empty space with certainty. That certainty is often wrong. Think about walking through a forest at dusk. In the fading light, a twisted branch may look like someone standing beside the path. Your heart reacts before your eyes fully understand. Then you step closer. The branch never changed. Only your perspective did. Many emotional reactions work exactly this way. Distance allows imagination to finish the picture. Closeness reveals reality. This is why slowing down changes relationships. Not because slower people are wiser by nature, but because slowing down gives truth time to catch up with emotion. There's another quiet signal that leaves a lasting impression on everyone you meet. Gratitude. Not the kind spoken automatically. Not the polite, thank you. That disappears a second later. Real gratitude changes the way you pay attention. Imagine sitting across from someone who remembers small details about your life. The book you mentioned months ago, the interview you were nervous about, the name of your grandmother, the city where you grew up. Those details quietly say something beautiful. I considered you worth remembering. Memory is one of the purest forms of attention. Attention is one of the deepest forms of respect. People rarely forget how it feels to be remembered. In a world where everyone is trying to be heard, the rarest gift may simply be making someone feel noticed. Perhaps that is why the strongest connections are often built through ordinary moments. Holding a door, looking up from your phone when someone begins speaking, listening without interrupting, smiling at someone whose day appears unusually heavy. None of these moments seem life-changing, yet together they quietly shape your identity. And identity quietly shapes every signal you send. Eventually, your presence begins speaking before your words do. People feel calmer around you because you have learned to be calm with yourself. People trust you because your actions rarely argue with your values. People feel accepted because you have stopped demanding perfection from yourself. Everything begins inside. That may be the simplest truth hidden beneath every relationship. The world is constantly responding to something much deeper than your appearance, your achievements, or your carefully chosen words. It is responding to the emotional atmosphere you carry wherever you go. And that atmosphere is created, little by little, by the thoughts you repeatedly believe, the stories you repeatedly tell yourself, the kindness you repeatedly practice when no one applauds, and the quiet integrity you continue choosing when it would be easier to pretend. One day, someone will leave a conversation with you, unable to explain exactly why they felt lighter, why they felt understood, why they felt safe enough to be honest. They may remember very little of what you actually said, but they will remember how they felt in your presence. Because words are often forgotten, advice fades, even memories soften with time. But the emotional experience of being deeply seen, of being quietly respected, of being allowed to exist without performance, has a way of remaining long after every sentence has disappeared. Perhaps that is the most powerful hidden signal of all. Not convincing people that you are remarkable, but becoming someone whose quiet presence reminds others that they no longer need to pretend. Because the strongest influence is rarely found in the words that demand attention. It is found in life that quietly demonstrates what peace, authenticity, and genuine human connection actually look like. Chapter 9. Become impossible to ignore. The people who leave the deepest impression on others are rarely the ones trying the hardest to be noticed. At first, that seems backwards. The world often appears to reward louder voices, bigger personalities, constant updates, endless self-promotion. It can make you believe that attention belongs to whoever asks for it most. But think about your own life. The people you remember years later, were they always the loudest? Or were they the ones who made you feel something difficult to explain? Perhaps it was a teacher who spoke quietly, yet every sentence stayed with you. A friend who never competed for attention, but whose presence somehow made every room feel calmer. Someone who rarely interrupted, yet when they finally spoke, everyone listened. There is something fascinating about quiet influence. It doesn't chase attention. It attracts it. Most people spend an enormous amount of energy trying to become interesting. They learn clever conversation starters, practice confident body language, search the perfect words. None of these things are wrong, but there is something deeper that people quietly notice before any technique has a chance to work. They notice whether your attention is focused on yourself or on life itself. Imagine talking with someone who spends every conversation trying to sound impressive. Every story becomes an achievement. Every experience becomes a competition. Even compliments quietly return to themselves. After a while, the conversation feels surprisingly heavy. Now imagine someone different. They ask thoughtful questions. They become genuinely curious about your answer. They notice details. They laugh easily. They are comfortable admitting they don't know something. Hours pass without either of you checking time. When you leave, you realize something unexpected. You know very little about their accomplishments, yet you cannot stop thinking about them. Why? Because unforgettable people rarely make conversations about proving themselves. They make conversations feel alive. Life naturally moves toward what feels alive. That is one of the quiet laws people rarely recognize. Imagine walking through a city street. Hundreds of buildings surround you. Most disappear from memory almost instantly. Then you notice one small cafe tucked into the corner. Nothing about it is flashy. No giant signs. No loud music. Just warm light spilling through the windows. People talking comfortably. Someone reading by the window. Without fully understanding why, you want to walk inside. Some people create that same feeling, not through performance, through authenticity. They are completely themselves. There is no invisible struggle to become someone else. People feel that. Perhaps you've noticed something similar while scrolling through social media. Hundreds of posts pass before your eyes. Perfect photos, perfect captions, perfect lives. Most disappear seconds later. Then someone shares something honest, not dramatic, not designed to attract sympathy, simply real. You stop scrolling. Something inside you pays attention. Authenticity interrupts noise. That may become even more valuable as the world grows louder. There is another misunderstanding about being unforgettable. Many people think influence begins with speaking. Often, it begins with listening. Real listening is surprisingly uncommon. Most conversations involve people waiting for their turn, quietly comparing experiences, thinking about their response before the other person has even finished. Imagine speaking with someone who never rushes your thoughts. You pause. They wait. You search for the right word. They don't rescue the silence. Instead, they remain fully present. Something remarkable happens. You begin saying things you didn't even realize you believed. Good listeners create clarity. not because they always have answers, because their attention creates space for truth to emerge. People remember that feeling far longer than they remember clever advice. There's another quality shared by people who are difficult to ignore. They are not constantly seeking agreement. Think about how much energy people spend protecting their image, avoiding disagreement, changing opinions depending on the audience, laughing at jokes they don't actually find funny, nodding even when they quietly disagree. Every small compromise seems harmless, yet together they slowly blur the outline of who you are. Now imagine someone who speaks honestly, without becoming argumentative. Someone who says, "I see it differently," calmly, without needing to win, without needing everyone to approve. There is something deeply reassuring about people whose opinions come from conviction rather than performance. Even those who disagree often respect them, not because they are always right, because they are real. Imagine a tree standing alone in an open field. The wind changes direction throughout the day. Some branches move. The leaves dance, yet the roots remain. People who quietly know who they are create the same impression. Life moves them. Experience changes them. There is something far more memorable than being impressive, being consistent. Most people spend enormous energy creating powerful first impressions. Very few think about the 50th impression. Yet, that is the one people remember. Imagine meeting someone who is charming the first day, kind the second, distant the third, warm the fourth, cold the fifth. You never quite know which version will appear. At first, the unpredictability feels interesting. After a while, it becomes exhausting. Now imagine someone different. They are thoughtful on Monday, thoughtful on Thursday, thoughtful 3 months later. Not because every day is perfect, but because their values remain steady even when their emotions change. There is a quiet comfort in that kind of reliability. People begin relaxing around them, not because they expect perfection, but because they no longer have to guess who will walk into the room. One of the rarest gifts you can give another person is emotional consistency. It says, "You don't have to keep adjusting yourself around me." That feeling creates trust faster than clever words ever could. Trust is built through repetition. Imagine crossing the same bridge every morning on your way to work. The first few times, you notice every sound, every movement beneath your feet. Eventually, you stop thinking about the bridge altogether, not because it became less important, because it has quietly proven itself reliable. Healthy people often create the same experience. Others stop questioning where they stand. They stop searching for hidden meanings behind every message. The relationship begins feeling safe enough for ordinary life. Safety is surprisingly attractive. Many people spend years chasing excitement, when what their heart has quietly been searching for is stability. There is another quality that makes certain people impossible to ignore. They are comfortable leaving space. Imagine asking someone a thoughtful question. Instead of answering immediately, they pause. Not because they are trying to sound wise, because they are actually thinking. That brief silence changes everything. In a world that rewards instant reactions, a thoughtful pause feels almost unusual. It quietly communicates something important. Your question deserves more than an automatic answer. The same is true in disagreement. Someone challenges your opinion. You don't rush to defend yourself. You breathe. You consider what they said. You respond instead of reacting. People notice that, not because it is dramatic, because calm has become uncommon. Think about watching a lake during a windy afternoon. The surface constantly changes. Nothing remains still. Now imagine the same lake at sunrise. The water becomes almost perfectly clear. Only then can you see the reflection beneath it. A restless mind rarely reflects clearly. A calm mind often sees what others miss. That clarity quietly influences everyone around it. There's another hidden habit that draws people toward you. Curiosity without comparison. This is much harder than it sounds. Imagine hearing that a friend received exciting news. Perhaps they were promoted, started a successful business, bought their first home, found someone they deeply love. One voice inside quietly celebrates. Another whispers, "Why isn't that happening for me?" Comparison steals attention from the present moment. Instead of appreciating another person's joy, You begin measuring your own life against theirs. The conversation changes, not outwardly, inwardly. People often sense when they are being compared, even if they cannot explain why. True curiosity feels different. It asks, "Tell me more," not because it is polite, because it genuinely enjoys watching other people grow. That generosity creates remarkable conversations. People naturally open up around those who are not secretly competing with them. Imagine planting two trees side by side. One spends all its energy trying to grow taller than the other. The second simply grows toward the sunlight. Years later, the healthier tree is rarely the one obsessed with comparison. It is the one quietly focused on its own direction. Life often follows the same pattern. People who become unforgettable rarely spend much time wondering whether they are ahead or behind. They remain deeply interested in becoming more themselves. There is another signal that quietly changes how others experience you, whether you allow yourself to enjoy ordinary moments. Many people postpone joy. "I'll relax after this project. I'll be happy when I achieve that goal. I'll finally enjoy life once everything is settled." But life has an interesting habit. Everything never fully settles. There's always another responsibility, another challenge, another uncertainty waiting around the corner. Imagine drinking coffee while watching rain fall outside your window. Nothing extraordinary happens. No achievement, no applause, no milestone. Yet for a few minutes, you are completely present. Those moments quietly transform a person, not because they solve life's problems, because they remind you that life exists beyond solving problems. People feel that around you. Someone who knows how to enjoy ordinary moments becomes easier to enjoy being around. Presence spreads, just like anxiety spreads. One quietly invites people to breathe. The other invites them to hurry. There is another misunderstanding worth noticing. Many believe becoming unforgettable means saying remarkable things. Often, it means noticing remarkable things. You remember someone's birthday without needing social media to remind you. You notice they sound unusually tired. You remember that they mentioned an important meeting last week. Weeks later, you ask how it went. These moments seem small. They rarely appear in inspirational quotes. Yet they quietly build relationships stronger than grand gestures. Attention is remembered. People do not always remember your advice. They remember feeling seen. Imagine standing in a crowded supermarket after a long day. Everyone seems busy, focused on their own lists, their own schedules, their own destination. Then one cashier smiles sincerely, looks you in the eyes, speaks as though you are more than the next customer in line. The interaction lasts less than a minute, yet somehow your entire evening feels a little lighter. Small moments often carry extraordinary weight, not because of their size, because of their sincerity. Perhaps this explains why influence rarely announces itself. It quietly accumulates. One conversation, one thoughtful question, one promise kept, one moment of patience. None seem important alone. Together, they become the reason people think of you long after you have gone home. And perhaps the people who leave the deepest mark on the world are not those who constantly ask, "How can I make people remember me?" but those who quietly ask a different question every day. How can I make this moment feel a little more human? Because, in the end, being impossible to ignore has very little to do with attracting attention. It has everything to do with becoming the kind of presence that people naturally hope to experience again. There is a strange irony about human attention. The more desperately you reach for it, the faster it slips through your fingers. The more peacefully you stop needing it, the more naturally it begins finding you. Most people spend years believing they need to become someone larger than life, more successful, more attractive, more entertaining, more accomplished, more visible. Yet if you think back to the people who changed your life, they were probably remembered for something much quieter. The teacher who believed in you before you believed in yourself. The friend who listened without trying to fix you. The colleague who remained calm when everyone else was overwhelmed. The stranger whose unexpected kindness arrived on the exact day you needed it. None of those moments demanded attention. They earned significance. There's an important difference. Attention can be captured. Significance must be lived. Imagine lighting a match. For a brief moment, the flame burns brightly. Everyone notices it, then it disappears. Now imagine the sunrise. It arrives slowly, almost silently. No dramatic announcement, no desperate attempt to impress. Yet before long, the entire landscape has changed. Some people live like the match. Others quietly become the sunrise. One creates excitement. The other creates transformation. The world remembers transformation. There is another hidden quality that makes someone unforgettable. They make other people feel more like themselves. Think about the conversations that stay with you. Often, they were not the ones where someone spoke brilliantly. They were the ones where you found yourself speaking honestly. You left feeling lighter, more understood, more connected to who you really are. That kind of conversation is rare. Not because honesty is rare, but because safety is. People reveal themselves when they believe they will not be punished for telling the truth. That safety cannot be manufactured. It grows naturally around people who have stopped judging themselves so harshly. Someone who constantly criticizes themselves often struggles to create emotional freedom for others, not intentionally. The inner atmosphere eventually becomes the outer atmosphere. Imagine carrying a cup filled to the very edge with water. Every small movement causes it to spill. Now imagine the same cup filled only halfway. You can walk more freely, turn more naturally, even stumble a little without losing everything. Inner peace works much the same way. When your emotional life is already overflowing with fear, comparison, or insecurity, every small disappointment feels enormous. Every delayed reply feels personal. Every disagreement feels threatening. But when there is space inside you, life no longer needs to be perfect for you to remain steady. That steadiness becomes one of the strongest forms of quiet influence. There is another truth that people often overlook. The most memorable individuals are rarely obsessed with being remembered. Their attention is somewhere else, creating, learning, serving, exploring, growing, while others are asking, "Do people notice me?" They are asking, "What can I build today?" That shift changes everything. Attention follows contribution far more often than performance. Imagine walking through a neighborhood where someone quietly tends a small garden every morning. No audience, no applause, just consistent care. Weeks pass, then months. One day the flowers bloom. Neighbors begin slowing down to admire them. Children stop to look. People smile as they walk by. The beauty was never created for attention. Attention simply arrived where genuine care had already been invested. Life often works exactly like that. What you patiently nurture eventually becomes visible, not because visibility was the goal, but because authenticity has a way of revealing itself. There is another quiet signal that makes people impossible to forget. They remain fully themselves regardless of who enters the room. Imagine someone who laughs loudly with close friends, then suddenly becomes almost unrecognizable around people they hope will approve of them. Their opinions shift. Their personality softens. Their confidence disappears. Most people have experienced this at some point. It is exhausting, not because adapting is always wrong, but because constantly changing leaves you wondering which version is actually real. Now imagine someone different. They speak respectfully to everyone, whether they are talking to a manager, a cashier, a child, or an old friend. The same kindness appears, the same honesty, the same quiet confidence. There is something deeply reassuring about people who remain recognizable in every environment. Consistency builds credibility. Credibility builds trust. Trust creates influence. There is another surprising realization. People are drawn toward those who seem genuinely interested in life, not merely interested in success. Life, the person who notices unusual clouds while walking home, who becomes fascinated by a book, who asks thoughtful questions, who enjoys learning simply because learning expands a world. Curiosity has an unusual quality. It keeps a person emotionally young. You have probably met people who seem alive regardless of their age, then others who seem tired long before growing old. The difference is not years. It is wonder. Wonder quietly protects the heart from becoming numb. Imagine standing in front of the ocean. Most people stop for at least a moment, not because they have never seen water before, because something vast reminds them how much still exists beyond themselves. Curiosity creates that same feeling every day. Every conversation becomes a chance to discover something new. Every mistake becomes information. Every challenge becomes another doorway instead of another wall. People naturally enjoy being around those who remain open to life. There is one final realization hidden beneath everything. Being impossible to ignore has almost nothing to do with becoming extraordinary. It has everything to do with becoming deeply genuine. The world encourages performance, carefully edited lives, perfect images, perfect answers, perfect confidence. Yet beneath all that noise, people continue searching for something much simpler. Someone who means what they say. Someone whose actions match their values. Someone who does not disappear when life becomes uncomfortable. Someone who brings peace instead of pressure. Those qualities cannot be purchased. They cannot be imitated forever. Eventually, every mask becomes too heavy to wear. Authenticity never suffers from that problem. It requires almost no energy, because nothing needs to be remembered. Nothing needs to be maintained. You simply arrive as yourself, day after day, conversation after conversation, decision after decision, and over time, people begin trusting something they cannot quite describe. Not your appearance, not your achievements, not your words alone. They begin trusting your presence. That kind of trust becomes unforgettable. Years later, someone may struggle to remember exactly what you wore, exactly what advice you gave, exactly how every conversation unfolded, but they will remember how calm they felt around you, how accepted they felt, how your presence never demanded that they become someone else. That is a rare gift, perhaps the rarest, because every person spends part of their life searching for a place where they can finally stop performing. Imagine becoming one of those places, not because you rescued anyone, not because you solved every problem, simply because your own life became rooted in honesty, quiet confidence, curiosity, and peace. That kind of influence does not fade when the conversation ends. It quietly travels with people long after they leave. And perhaps that has always been the secret. The people who become impossible to ignore are not the ones who spend their lives trying to stand out from the crowd. They are the ones who become so deeply at peace with who they are that everyone they meet is gently reminded they no longer have to hide who they are either, because the most powerful presence in any room is never the one demanding attention. It is the one quietly giving everyone else permission to breathe, to belong, and to become more fully themselves. Chapter 10. Why the Right People Stay. The people who truly belong in your life rarely arrive because you convince them to stay. They stay because, somewhere along the way, staying became the most natural thing to do. That realization changes almost everything. Most people secretly believe relationships survive because someone worked harder, loved more, explained better, sacrificed longer, or tolerated more than they should have. Sometimes effort matters, but effort alone has never been what keeps healthy relationships alive. Think about your oldest friendship, not the most exciting one, the one that has quietly survived years, busy schedules, misunderstandings, distance, life changes. There was probably no grand strategy, no constant effort to prove your worth. The relationship simply had room to breathe. That room matters more than most people realize. Imagine holding a handful of sand. Close your fingers gently. The sand remains. Grip it tightly, and grains begin slipping through the spaces between your fingers. The tighter you squeeze, the faster you lose what you were trying to keep. People often treat relationships exactly this way, not because they want control, because they fear loss. Fear quietly disguises itself as love. It says, if I care enough, if I give enough, if I become enough, they'll never leave. Those thoughts sound loving. Underneath them, they often carry something much heavier. The fear that your value depends on someone else's decision. That fear changes everything. It changes how you speak, how you wait, how you forgive, how you disagree, how you imagine the future. Eventually, the relationship stops feeling like two people walking together. It begins feeling like one person carrying both. No one can comfortably live there forever. There's another truth that people rarely notice. The right people are not attracted only to your strengths. They are also attracted to your honesty. Think about how exhausting it is to spend every conversation trying to appear perfect, choosing every word carefully, hiding uncertainty, pretending you always know what you're doing. Eventually, you become tired, not because conversation is difficult, because pretending is. Now imagine speaking with someone beside whom you don't have to edit yourself. You can admit, I don't know. That hurt me. I made a mistake. Nothing terrible happens. The relationship becomes stronger, not weaker. That surprises many people. They believe vulnerability drives people away. Often, it drives away people who expect a performance. The ones who remain are usually searching for something real. Imagine visiting two houses. One is beautifully decorated, every cushion perfectly placed, every surface spotless, yet you are afraid to touch anything. The other is simple, warm, comfortable. You feel welcome the moment you walk inside. Neither house is perfect. Only one feels like somewhere you could truly live. People often create relationships the same way. Some become museums, everything carefully protected, nothing genuine allowed. Others become homes, honest, comfortable, imperfect, alive. The right people are rarely looking for museums. They are looking for somewhere they can breathe. There's another misunderstanding that quietly causes unnecessary suffering. Many believe that if someone leaves, it automatically means they were not enough. That conclusion feels natural. It is also deeply incomplete. Imagine trying to grow a tropical plant in freezing weather. You water it, protect it, care for it. Still, it struggles. Now place the same plant in the environment where it naturally belongs. Everything changes. The plant did not suddenly become worthy of growth. The conditions finally matched its nature. Relationships often work this way. Compatibility is not the same as value. Someone can appreciate you and still not be capable of walking beside the life you are building. Someone can care deeply and still be moving in a completely different direction. Those realities can exist together. Many people spend years trying to become more lovable when the real issue was never lovability. It was alignment. Alignment rarely creates dramatic stories. It quietly creates peace. Imagine rowing a boat with another person. If both row in the same direction, the journey feels surprisingly smooth. If one rows forward while the other rows backward, even enormous effort creates very little movement. Neither person may be wrong. They are simply pulling toward different destinations. Relationships become exhausting when direction constantly requires negotiation. The right people often share something invisible. Not identical personalities, not identical interests, a shared direction. They value similar things. They respect similar boundaries. They solve conflict in similar ways. Life becomes less about convincing and more about building. There's another quiet quality that keeps meaningful people close. Reliability, not dramatic romance, not constant excitement. Reliability. Imagine calling someone because life suddenly became difficult. You don't wonder whether they will answer. You simply know they will try. That certainty creates profound comfort. Now imagine the opposite. Every interaction feels unpredictable. Will they respond warmly today? Will they disappear for days? Will they misunderstand everything you say? Your nervous system never fully relaxes. Eventually, even joyful moments become overshadowed by uncertainty. People often mistake unpredictability for passion. Passion can be beautiful. Uncertainty is exhausting. The right people rarely require you to constantly interpret where you stand. They communicate. They apologize. They explain. Not perfectly, simply honestly. There's remarkable beauty in ordinary consistency. Think about sunrise. It arrives almost every morning, not because it is trying to impress anyone, because that is simply its nature. Perhaps the healthiest people become a little like that, not exciting because there is a question hidden inside every lasting relationship. Most people never ask about it. Instead, they wonder, how can I keep this person interested? What should I say? How do I avoid losing them? Those questions are understandable, but they quietly place all of your attention on holding on. The better question sounds different. What makes someone feel peaceful enough to stay? The answer has very little to do with perfection. Imagine arriving at someone's home after a long journey. You are tired. You set your bags down. No one expects you to perform. No one measures every word you say. No one keeps score of every mistake. You simply feel welcome. There is something deeply healing about places where you no longer have to earn your right to exist. Healthy relationships create that same feeling, not because standards disappear, not because boundaries no longer matter, because acceptance quietly becomes stronger than performance. Many people have never experienced that kind of connection, so when they finally do, it almost feels unfamiliar. At first, they wait for the hidden condition. Surely this kindness will disappear. Surely this patience has limits. Surely one mistake will change everything. That expectation often has very little to do with the person standing in front of them. It comes from old experiences quietly following them into new ones. Imagine walking through a doorway carrying a heavy backpack. Hours pass before you remember you are still wearing it. The room was never heavy. The weight came with you. Emotional expectations often work the same way. You expect rejection because rejection once happened. You expect criticism because criticism once felt familiar. You expect distance because distance once became normal. Without realizing it, you begin responding to old memories instead of present reality. The right people often help you notice this, not through speeches, not by trying to change you, simply by remaining consistent long enough for your fears to slowly lose their certainty. Consistency has a quiet kind of power. Think about learning to trust a bridge. The first time you cross it, you notice every movement, every sound beneath your feet. The 10th time, you barely think about it. Nothing dramatic happened. The bridge simply continued doing what it had always done. Trust grows in exactly the same way, not through promises, through repeated experiences. One conversation, another conversation, one difficult moment handled with honesty, another handled with respect. Eventually, the relationship becomes something your heart no longer feels the need to question every day. There is another reason the right people remain. They allow growth. Many relationships quietly become prisons without anyone intending them to. One person changes. The other becomes uncomfortable. New interests appear. Different dreams begin forming. Instead of becoming curious, fear quietly asks, "Why are you changing?" Life has never stood still. Why should people? Imagine planting a tree in your garden. Years pass. Its roots deepen. Its branches spread wider. Its shape slowly changes with every season. You would never become angry because the tree continued growing. You would expect it. Yet people often become frightened when someone they love begins becoming more themselves. Growth can feel threatening when identity depends on things staying exactly the same. Healthy love understands something different. Growth is not distance. Growth is life. The remarkable thing is that people who encourage your growth rarely lose you because of it. More often, they become part of the reason you continue growing. There's another hidden quality that quietly keeps meaningful relationships alive: the ability to repair. Many people believe successful relationships avoid conflict. They imagine couples who never argue, friends who never disappoint each other, families who never misunderstand one another. Life simply doesn't work that way. Imagine owning a favorite ceramic mug. One day it slips from your hand. A small crack appears. Some people immediately throw it away. Others carefully repair it, not because they enjoy broken things, because they understand that something valuable is worth restoring. Relationships often become stronger after honest repair, not because pain is enjoyable, because repair builds confidence. It quietly teaches both people, even when something goes wrong, we know how to find each other again. That lesson is priceless. There's another misunderstanding that quietly keeps people exhausted. Many believe they are responsible for another person's emotions. Imagine someone arrives home after a difficult day. They seem quiet. You immediately begin searching for what you did wrong. Perhaps nothing. Perhaps they simply had a difficult meeting. Perhaps they are grieving something they haven't yet found words for. Perhaps they are simply tired. When your identity becomes responsible for every emotional shift in another person, life becomes impossibly heavy. Healthy relationships make room for individual emotional lives. One person's sadness does not automatically become the other person's failure. One person's silence does not automatically become rejection. Compassion replaces assumption. That changes everything. Imagine sitting beside someone watching the ocean. Neither of you speaks for several minutes. The silence feels peaceful. Now imagine sitting beside someone where every moment of silence demands explanation. One experience creates rest. The other creates pressure. Many people don't realize they have spent years living inside emotional pressure. The right people often introduce something beautifully unfamiliar: ease. Ease does not mean the absence of effort. It means effort no longer feels like survival. There's another quiet truth hiding inside lasting relationships. People stay where they are respected. Respect is different from admiration. Admiration often depends on achievement. Respect depends on character. Imagine disagreeing with someone. Your opinions remain different. Neither person changes their mind. Yet, both leave the conversation feeling heard. That is respect. Now imagine winning every argument while slowly losing trust. What have you really gained? Many people become skilled at proving themselves right. Far fewer become skilled at protecting connection while telling the truth. The right people quietly choose both whenever possible. Honesty without cruelty. Kindness without pretending. Boundaries without punishment. Forgiveness without forgetting wisdom. Those balances are rarely dramatic. They quietly shape relationships over years. There is another realization that surprises many people. The right people do not expect you to stop being human. You will have anxious days, moments of doubt, times when your words come out wrong, days when life overwhelms you. The question is not whether imperfection appears. The question is whether both people create enough safety to recover from it. Imagine walking together during unexpected rain. Neither of you blames the weather. You simply open the umbrella and keep walking. Life brings emotional storms just as naturally. Healthy relationships rarely spend all their energy asking why the rain came. They quietly learn how to walk through it together. Perhaps that is one of the greatest differences between relationships built on conditions and relationships built on character. One asks, "Can you remain perfect?" The other quietly asks, "Can we remain honest?" Honesty has carried more relationships through difficulty than perfection ever could, because perfection creates distance. Honesty creates understanding, and understanding is often the quiet reason the right people never feel the need to leave. They stay not because life becomes free from mistakes, but because they have discovered something much more valuable, a place where truth is safer than pretending, and where two imperfect people continue choosing one another, not because they never struggle, but because they know how to keep finding each other again. One day, without realizing exactly what happened, you stop wondering who might leave. That question simply becomes less important. Not because everyone suddenly stays. Life does not make that promise. People will still come. People will still go. Circumstances will still change. Some chapters will still end before you are ready. The difference is quieter than that. You no longer build your entire sense of peace around another person's decision. That changes the way you love. Imagine standing in a train station. Some people arrive, others leave. The station remains. It welcomes every train without trying to stop one from departing. There's wisdom in that image. Your heart was never meant to become a prison that locks every meaningful person inside. It was meant to become a place where genuine connection is welcomed and genuine freedom is respected. Many people confuse holding on with loving deeply. The two are not the same. Holding on often grows from fear. Love grows from trust. Fear whispers, "Don't let this change." Love quietly says, "I hope we keep growing together." One tries to preserve a moment forever. The other understands that every healthy relationship must continue becoming something new. Nothing alive remains exactly the same. Think about the people you cared about 5 years ago. Perhaps they laugh differently now, think differently, dream differently, carry different responsibilities. If they had remained exactly the same, would they really have been living? Growth is one of the quiet promises life makes to everyone. Healthy relationships make room for that promise. There is another truth that surprises many people. The right people stay because they feel free to be honest. Imagine asking someone, "How are you?" Most people answer automatically, "I'm fine." The conversation moves on. Now imagine someone pauses, looks at you, and quietly says, "Today has been difficult." That answer requires courage. But courage only appears where honesty feels safe. If someone constantly fears being judged, corrected, or dismissed, they eventually stop telling you what is real. Not because they want distance, because honesty no longer feels welcome. The strongest relationships are rarely built on constant happiness. They are built on truthful conversations. Truth creates intimacy. Pretending creates loneliness. Even when two people are sitting beside one another, imagine sharing a house where every room must always remain perfectly clean. Nothing can be moved. Nothing can be broken. Nothing can be out of place. Eventually, the house stops feeling like home. Now imagine another house. Books lie open on the table. The kitchen smells like dinner. Laughter echoes down the hallway. Life is happening there. It isn't flawless. It is lived in. Relationships become strongest when they feel lived in, not performed, not polished, real. There is another quiet reason the right people remain. They are interested in understanding, not simply being understood. Think about the last disagreement you witnessed. Perhaps both people spent the entire conversation explaining themselves. Neither stopped long enough to become curious about the other. The discussion became two speeches, not one conversation. Curiosity changes conflict. Instead of asking, "How do I defend myself?" you begin asking, "What pain am I not seeing?" That question softens something inside you, not because it excuses harmful behavior, because understanding often reveals what judgment never could. Every person carries invisible battles. Some are grieving, some are afraid, some are quietly exhausted, some are carrying disappointments they have never spoken aloud. You rarely see those burdens. You simply experience the way they influence behavior. Compassion begins where certainty ends. There's another hidden quality that quietly keeps meaningful people close. They feel accepted without feeling stagnant. Acceptance does not mean telling someone they never need to grow. It means separating their worth from their current struggles. Imagine teaching a child to ride a bicycle. You don't shout every time they wobble. You don't conclude they will never learn. You encourage them while believing they are already worthy of your patience. Healthy relationships quietly offer that same gift. I believe in your ability to grow, without implying you must become someone else before you deserve love. That balance is rare. Perhaps that is why it feels unforgettable. There is another realization that often arrives later in life. The people who stay are not always the ones who promised they would. Sometimes, the loudest promises disappear first. The quietest loyalty remains. Think about a storm. Trees that survive are not always the tallest. Often, they're the ones whose roots reach deepest. Words can sound impressive. Character quietly reveals itself over time. Character appears in ordinary moments. Keeping a promise no one else remembers. showing up when it is inconvenient, speaking kindly when frustration would be easier, remaining truthful when deception offers a shortcut. Those moments rarely receive applause. They quietly become the foundation of lasting trust. Imagine building a house. Visitors admire the windows, the roof, the beautiful paint. Almost no one compliments the foundation, yet the foundation silently supports everything else. Relationships work exactly the same way. Grand gestures are beautiful. Shared vacations become treasured memories. Celebrations matter. But it is the ordinary days that quietly determine whether people remain. The phone call returned, the apology offered without excuses, the hug after a difficult day, the willingness to laugh together after making mistakes. Life is mostly ordinary days. The right people know how to love there. There is one final truth that many people spend years searching for. The right people do not stay because you finally learn how to keep everyone. They stay because you stop trying to become someone different for every person you met. You became easier to know, easier to trust, easier to understand. Not because you became predictable, because you became authentic. Authenticity has remarkable patience. It does not rush connection. It does not beg for attention. It does not panic when relationships unfold slowly. It quietly allows people to discover who you really are. Some will appreciate that. Some will not. That has always been true. The remarkable thing is that you no longer need universal approval to experience meaningful connection. A few genuine relationships begin outweighing dozens of shallow ones. Depth quietly replaces quantity. Peace replaces performance. Presence replaces pressure. One day, you may find yourself sitting beside someone you love. No dramatic conversation. No extraordinary event. Perhaps you're driving home together in comfortable silence. Perhaps you're drinking tea while rain taps gently against the window. Perhaps you're walking through a supermarket, deciding what to cook for dinner. Nothing remarkable appears to be happening, yet something extraordinary is present. Neither of you is trying to earn the other's affection. Neither is pretending. Neither is wondering whether they are enough. You are simply sharing an ordinary moment with someone who has seen your strengths, your flaws, your fears, your hopes, and has chosen, again and again, to keep walking beside you. That is the quiet beauty of the right people. They do not erase every hardship. They do not promise a life without disappointment. What they offer is something far more enduring. A relationship where honesty is welcomed, growth is encouraged, respect is protected, silence is comfortable, laughter comes easily, and love no longer feels like something that must constantly be chased. Perhaps that is what your heart has been searching for all along. Not someone who would never leave under any circumstance, but someone with whom leaving never becomes the easiest choice. Because both of you have learned that lasting relationships are not built through perfect words, endless sacrifice, or carefully managed appearances. They are built one ordinary day at a time, by two people who continue choosing honesty over performance, understanding over assumption, growth over fear, and presence over perfection. In the end, the right people stay for a surprisingly simple reason. They have found someone who allows them to become more fully themselves. And in offering that same freedom to one another, they discover that the strongest form of love has never been about holding on tightly. It has always been about creating a life so deeply rooted in trust, respect, and quiet authenticity that staying becomes the most natural choice of all. Final reflection. The quiet life that was waiting for you. Perhaps the greatest surprise isn't that your life can change. It's that it can begin changing long before anyone else notices. Not with a dramatic decision, not with a perfect morning routine, not with becoming fearless overnight, but with one quiet moment. The moment you stop asking the world to tell you who you are. For most of life, people are handed invisible scripts. Be more successful. Be more attractive. Be more agreeable. Be more impressive. Be more like everyone admires, and less like yourself. So they spend years chasing approval, trying to earn a place where they already belonged. They become experts at performing, yet strangers to themselves. But something remarkable happens the day you decide that your worth is no longer something to negotiate. You stop shrinking to fit into conversations. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop chasing people who keep walking away. You stop measuring your life against carefully edited snapshots on a screen. Little by little, your mind becomes quieter, and in that silence, you begin hearing a voice that had been drowned out for years. Your own. That voice will not always tell you what is easy. It will invite you toward what is true. It will ask you to become patient when the world rewards urgency. Honest when pretending seems safer. Calm when everyone else is reacting. Compassionate when bitterness feels justified. And authentic when wearing another mask will be more convenient. Those choices may seem small, but lives are rarely transformed by one extraordinary decision. They are transformed by thousands of ordinary ones. One thoughtful conversation. One boundary respected. One fear faced. One quiet act of discipline. One moment of kindness no one applauds. Over time, those moments become a character. That character becomes a reputation. That reputation becomes a life. Perhaps you will notice that the things you once chased begin arriving differently. Peace replaces constant pressure. Confidence no longer depends on applause. Relationships become fewer, yet far deeper. Success becomes less about proving yourself and more about expressing yourself. You discover that happiness is rarely found at the finish line. It quietly grows beside the person you become while walking toward it. And maybe that has always been the hidden lesson. The strongest mind is not the loudest. The wisest person is not the one with every answer. The richest life is not the one that looks perfect from the outside. It is a life where your thoughts, your actions, and your values finally begin moving in the same direction. If these words have stayed with you, don't let them become another audiobook you enjoyed and then forgot. Carry one idea with you today. Just one. Notice one thought before it becomes a reaction. Choose one honest conversation instead of one comfortable lie. Take one small step toward the person you know you can become. Small changes, repeated consistently, have a quiet way of reshaping an entire life. Thank you for spending this time with me. There are countless voices competing for your attention every day, and the fact that you chose to stay until this final moment means more than you may realize. If this audiobook gave you even one new way of seeing yourself or the